The Imperium of Man spans 1,000,000 worlds, each categorized and cataloged according to its function within the vast machinery of humanity's galactic empire. Among these countless classifications, shrine worlds occupy a unique position in the administrative and spiritual hierarchy. These planets serve neither as forge worlds producing war materiel, nor as agri-worlds feeding the Imperium's masses, nor as hive worlds providing endless conscripts for the Imperial Guard. Instead, they function as focal points of faith, places where the Imperial cult manifests in its most concentrated and powerful form. The Adeptus Ministorum, also known as the Ecclesiarchy, maintains strict criteria for what constitutes a true shrine world. The designation cannot be claimed through mere popularity or the presence of a particularly impressive cathedral. A shrine world must possess a direct connection to the divine works of the God Emperor, to his saints, or to events of such profound spiritual significance that they have shaped the course of imperial history. This distinction separates shrine worlds from the countless pilgrimage sites that dot the Imperium, where local cults venerate minor miracles or regional saints. The difference lies not in degree, but in kind. Cardinal worlds represent a separate classification entirely, serving as administrative centers for the Ecclesiarchy's vast bureaucratic apparatus. While cardinal worlds certainly contain magnificent temples and house important religious figures, their primary function involves governance, record-keeping, and the coordination of missionary efforts across entire sectors. A cardinal world might lack any significant holy relic or martyrdom site, functioning instead as a hub of ecclesiastical power. Ophelia 7 stands as perhaps the most prominent example, serving as one of the Ecclesiarchy's two primary headquarters alongside Terra itself, yet its importance stems from administrative necessity rather than the presence of sacred artifacts. Ecclesiarchal palaces, meanwhile, can exist on any world where the Ministorum maintains a significant presence. These structures house senior clergy, contain extensive libraries of approved religious texts, and serve as centers for training preachers and missionaries. An ecclesiarchal palace might dominate the skyline of a hive world or stand as the sole structure of note on a minor colony, but its presence does not transform that world into a shrine world. The distinction matters greatly within the Imperium's rigid hierarchies, affecting everything from tithe obligations to defensive priorities during military campaigns. The process by which a world receives the Shrine World designation involves extensive investigation and deliberation by the highest ranks of the Adeptus Ministorum. Cardinals, confessors, and specialized orders of the Ecclesiarchy must verify the authenticity of relics, confirm the details of martyrdoms, and establish beyond doubt that the site in question possesses genuine spiritual significance. This verification process can take decades or even centuries, as the Ministorum examines historical records, tests relics for authenticity, and investigates claims of miracles. The Ecclesiarchy has learned through bitter experience that false relics and fabricated martyrdoms can undermine the faith of billions, providing openings for heretical cults and chaos corruption. Once a world receives official designation as a shrine world, the Adeptus Ministorum assumes direct control over its governance and development. Unlike most imperial worlds, where planetary governors answer to the administratum and maintain considerable autonomy in local affairs, shrine worlds fall under ecclesiastical jurisdiction. Cardinals or senior confessors typically serve as the ultimate authority on these worlds, commanding both spiritual and temporal power. This arrangement ensures that the sacred nature of these planets remains paramount, with all other considerations subordinate to the preservation and veneration of holy sites. The strategic value of shrine worlds extends far beyond their obvious religious significance. These planets serve as anchors of faith throughout the Imperium, generating waves of devotion that ripple across entire sectors. Pilgrims who visit shrine worlds return to their home planets transformed by their experiences, becoming living testimonies to the power of the imperial cult. These individuals often prove resistant to heretical influences, having witnessed firsthand the physical manifestations of the emperor's divine power. In regions where faith wavers or chaos corruption threatens, the Ecclesiarchy actively promotes pilgrimages to nearby shrine worlds, using them as tools to reinforce orthodoxy and suppress dangerous ideologies. The tithe obligations of shrine worlds differ fundamentally from those imposed on other imperial planets. Rather than providing regiments for the Imperial Guard, raw materials for forge worlds, or food for hive worlds, shrine worlds contribute faith itself to the Imperium. This manifests in several forms. The Ecclesiarchy extracts vast wealth from pilgrims who visit these planets, purchasing passage, accommodation, and countless religious trinkets. These funds flow into the Ministerum's coffers, funding missionary work, constructing new temples, and maintaining the Ecclesiarchy's political influence. Additionally, shrine worlds serve as recruitment grounds for the Order's militant of the Adepta Sororitas, the armed forces of the Ecclesiarchy. Young women raised on shrine worlds, steeped in faith from birth, and surrounded by constant reminders of the Emperor's power, often prove ideal candidates for training as battle sisters. The diversity of shrine world origins reflects the vast scope of Imperial history and the countless ways in which the Emperor's influence has touched the galaxy. Some shrine worlds mark sites where Imperial saints met their martyrdom, their deaths transforming ordinary planets into places of pilgrimage. The world of Gathalammer, for instance, became a shrine world following the martyrdom of Saint Gathalammer, whose sacrifice during the Age of Apostasy inspired countless faithful and helped turn the tide against the madness of Goj Vandir. The planet now hosts billions of pilgrims annually, all seeking to walk the ground where the saint fell and pray at the site of her final stand. Other shrine worlds contain fragments of the Emperor's own works, physical remnants of his presence during the Great Crusade or earlier periods of human history. These artifacts might include weapons he wielded, armor he wore, or even structures he personally sanctified. The verification of such relics requires extraordinary scrutiny, as the value of genuine artifacts of the Emperor's making cannot be overstated. A single confirmed relic can transform an obscure world into one of the Imperium's most important spiritual centers, drawing pilgrims from across the galaxy and warranting significant military resources for its defense. Pre-unification holy sites represent another category of shrine world origins. During the Age of Strife, isolated human populations across the galaxy developed their own religions and sacred sites. When the Great Crusade reconnected these lost colonies with the broader Imperium, the Ecclesiarchy faced the task of integrating existing faiths into the imperial cult. In some cases, local religions already venerated the Emperor, having preserved garbled memories of his existence through millennia of isolation. Sites sacred to these proto-imperial faiths sometimes received recognition as legitimate shrine worlds, their ancient devotions validated and incorporated into orthodox doctrine. The physical transformation of a world into a shrine world typically involves massive construction projects spanning centuries. The Ecclesiarchy redirects enormous resources toward building temples, processional ways, and facilities to accommodate millions or even billions of pilgrims. These structures must reflect the glory of the Emperor and the significance of the holy sites they surround. Architects compete for the honor of designing these monuments, knowing that their work will stand for millennia as testaments to faith. The scale of construction on major shrine worlds rivals that of hive world development, with entire continents reshaped to accommodate the needs of pilgrims and clergy. The populations of shrine worlds develop distinct characteristics shaped by constant exposure to religious fervor and the presence of countless pilgrims. Native inhabitants often serve as guides, scribes, or workers maintaining the vast temple complexes. Families might hold hereditary positions as guardians of specific shrines or keepers of particular relics, passing these responsibilities down through generations. These populations typically display extraordinary devotion to the imperial cult, having internalized its doctrines from birth and witnessed the transformative power of faith on countless pilgrims. This intense religiosity makes shrine world populations particularly valuable to the Ecclesiarchy, providing reliable servants immune to the doubts and heresies that plague less faithful worlds. The process of canonization within the Imperium represents one of the Ecclesiarchy's most solemn and politically charged responsibilities. Unlike the simple veneration of local heroes or martyrs, which occurs spontaneously across countless worlds, the formal recognition of an imperial saint requires extensive investigation, deliberation, and approval by the highest ecclesiastical authorities. The Synod Ministra, an assembly of the Ecclesiarchy's most powerful cardinals, bears ultimate responsibility for declaring new saints, though the process typically begins at lower levels of the ministorum hierarchy. Local confessors or missionaries who witness remarkable acts of faith or apparent miracles submit detailed reports to their superiors, initiating investigations that can span decades or even centuries. The Ecclesiarchy maintains strict criteria for sainthood, though these standards have evolved considerably throughout imperial history. A candidate must demonstrate extraordinary devotion to the God Emperor, perform acts that clearly manifest his divine will, and inspire faith in others through their deeds or martyrdom. The presence of miracles, while not strictly required, significantly strengthens a case for canonization. These miracles might include healing the sick, surviving otherwise fatal wounds through faith alone, or demonstrating powers that defy natural explanation. The ministorum employs specialized investigators, often drawn from the order's dialogus of the Adeptus Sororitas, to verify claims of miraculous events and distinguish genuine manifestations of the emperor's power from fraud, psychic phenomena, or chaos corruption. The political dimensions of canonization cannot be ignored. The declaration of a new saint affects the balance of power within the Ecclesiarchy, as the cardinal or confessor who champion the candidate's cause typically gains considerable influence. Shrine worlds dedicated to newly canonized saints become sources of immense wealth and prestige, with control over these planets representing valuable prizes in the ministorum's internal power struggles. Different factions within the Ecclesiarchy often support competing candidates for sainthood, each seeking to advance their own theological interpretations or political agendas. The Synod Ministra must navigate these competing interests while maintaining the integrity of the canonization process, a task that requires considerable diplomatic skill and often results in lengthy delays as various parties negotiate and compromise. Saint Gathalamr stands among the most significant figures canonized during the Age of Apostasy, that dark period when Goj Vander corrupted the Ecclesiarchy and nearly destroyed the Imperium from within. Her martyrdom occurred during the final stages of the civil war that ended Vander's reign, when forces loyal to the corrupt High Lord clashed with those supporting Sebastian Thor's Reformation movement. The details of her death vary across different ecclesiastical sources, but all accounts agree that she sacrificed herself to protect a group of faithful civilians from Vander's Fraterus Templar. The world that now bears her name, Gathalamr, transformed from an unremarkable colony into one of the Imperium's most important shrine worlds following her canonization. The planet's capital contains the Basilica Gathalamr, a massive structure built around the exact site where the saint fell, with her preserved remains displayed in a reliquary of gold and adamantium at the basilica's heart. The architectural complex surrounding Saint Gathalamr's shrine extends across hundreds of square kilometers, encompassing dozens of subsidiary temples, processional ways wide enough to accommodate millions of pilgrims simultaneously, and vast plazas where preachers deliver sermons to gathered crowds. The Ecclesiarchy commissioned the finest artisans in the Segmentum Solar to decorate these structures, resulting in walls covered with frescoes depicting scenes from the saint's life, stained glass windows that cast colored light across prayer halls, and statues carved from rare stone imported from distant worlds. The central basilica rises nearly a kilometer into the sky, its spires visible from orbit and topped with massive aquillas forged from precious metals. The interior spaces dwarf those of most imperial cathedrals, with the main worship hall capable of holding over 1 million supplicants at once. Dimamr, the shrine world dedicated to Lord Solar Macharius, presents a different category of saintly veneration. Macharius never received formal canonization by the Synod Ministra, as his achievements occurred relatively recently in imperial terms, and the political complications surrounding his legacy remain unresolved. Nevertheless, the Ecclesiarchy recognizes him as a saint in practice, if not in formal doctrine. acknowledging that his crusade expanded the Imperium's borders more successfully than any military campaign since the Great Crusade itself. Dimamur served as Macharius's headquarters during the later stages of his conquests, and he died there under circumstances that remain disputed among historians. Some accounts claim natural causes, others suggest poison, while the most popular version among the faithful holds that the emperor simply called his faithful servant home after completing his appointed task. The shrines on Dimamur focus less on architectural grandeur and more on martial commemoration. Vast parade grounds surround monuments to the regiments that fought in Macharius's crusade, with each unit's banner and battle honors recorded in stone. The central shrine contains Macharius's tomb, a relatively austere structure by shrine world standards, reflecting the Lord Solar's reputation as a practical military commander rather than a religious figure. However, the Ecclesiarchy has gradually elaborated the site over the centuries since his death, adding chapels, reliquaries containing his personal effects, and meditation chambers where military officers come to seek inspiration before their own campaigns. The Adeptus Munitorum actively encourages promising guard commanders to visit Dimamur, viewing the pilgrimage as valuable preparation for high command. Sebastian Thor's veneration presents unique complications for the Ecclesiarchy, as he served as Ecclesiarch himself and fundamentally reformed the Ministorum's structure and doctrine. Multiple worlds claim connections to Thor, including his birthplace, planets where he preached during his rise to power, and sites associated with his confrontation with Vandir. The Ecclesiarchy has never designated a single primary shrine world for Thor, instead recognizing several planets as equally significant pilgrimage destinations. This unusual arrangement reflects theological debates about whether Thor should be venerated primarily as a saint who performed miracles and inspired faith, or as a reformer whose administrative and doctrinal changes saved the Imperium from destruction. Different factions within the Ministorum emphasize different aspects of his legacy, with some promoting the miraculous elements of his story, while others focus on his role as a political and religious leader. The shrines dedicated to Thor typically incorporate elements emphasizing his role as a unifying figure who brought order from chaos. Architectural designs favor symmetry and balance, with paired towers representing the dual nature of his authority as both spiritual and temporal leader. Reliquaries on Thor-dedicated worlds often contain copies of his writings and decrees rather than physical remains or personal effects, reflecting the intellectual and administrative nature of his contributions to the Imperial cult. The Ecclesiarchy maintains these shrines as teaching sites where clergy study Thor's reforms and learn the proper relationship between the Ministorum and other Imperial institutions. Saint Celestine represents perhaps the most unusual case of saintly veneration in the modern Imperium, as she continues to manifest physically during times of crisis, rather than existing solely as a historical figure. The Ecclesiarchy has documented multiple appearances of the living saint across different war zones, where she leads Imperial forces to victory before vanishing as mysteriously as she arrived. This ongoing presence complicates the traditional model of shrine world development, as Celestine has no single martyrdom site or tomb around which to build monuments. Instead, the Ministorum has designated several worlds as Celestine shrines based on locations where she performed particularly significant miracles or won crucial victories. These shrines function differently from traditional saint sites, serving more as commemorative monuments to specific battles than as repositories of holy remains. The architectural approach to Celestine shrines emphasizes martial themes and angelic imagery, reflecting her manifestation as a winged warrior accompanied by the Gemini Superia. Statues depict her in full armor with wings spread, often positioned atop high towers or mountain peaks where they can be seen from great distances. The Adeptus Sororitas maintains particularly close connections to Celestine shrines, with orders militant frequently stationing forces at these sites and using them as recruitment centers. Young women who grow up near Celestine shrines often express strong desires to join the Sororitas, inspired by the living saint's example of militant faith. The preservation of holy remains presents significant technical and theological challenges for the Ecclesiarchy. Saints' bodies must be protected from decay while remaining accessible for veneration by pilgrims. The Ministorum employs various preservation techniques, some involving advanced technology and others relying on more mystical methods. Stasis fields can maintain bodies in perfect condition indefinitely, though the Ecclesiarchy uses this technology sparingly due to its association with pre-imperial science and the risk of mechanical failure. More commonly, the Ministorum treats remains with preservative compounds and displays them in sealed reliquaries filled with inert gases, allowing pilgrims to view the saint through armored glass while protecting the body from environmental damage. Reliquaries themselves represent significant works of art and craftsmanship, often incorporating precious metals, rare gems, and intricate religious iconography. The most elaborate reliquaries take decades to construct, with master artisans competing for the honor of creating these sacred objects. A typical major reliquary might stand several meters tall, constructed from gilded adamantium and decorated with scenes from the saint's life, rendered in precious stones and enamel work. The glass or crystal panels through which pilgrims view the remains often incorporate blessed materials, with some believing that looking through such sanctified lenses allows the faithful to perceive spiritual truths invisible to ordinary sight. Ossuaries serve a related but distinct function on shrine worlds, housing the remains of lesser saints, martyrs, and particularly devout pilgrims who died during their journeys. These structures range from simple crypts beneath major basilicas to vast underground complexes containing millions of bodies arranged in decorative patterns. The Ecclesiarchy considers proximity to holy remains spiritually beneficial, leading wealthy pilgrims to pay enormous sums for burial rites on shrine worlds. The revenue generated by these arrangements provides significant funding for the Ministorum's activities, while the presence of countless faithful dead reinforces the sacred character of these planets. The Adepta Sororitas maintains a unique relationship with shrine worlds that extends beyond simple military protection. The Order's militant station forces at major shrines, providing security against both physical threats and spiritual corruption. Battle Sisters patrol pilgrimage routes, investigate reports of heretical activity, and stand ready to defend sacred sites against any enemy. Their presence serves both practical and symbolic purposes, demonstrating the Ecclesiarchy's commitment to protecting the faithful while providing visible reminders of the Emperor's power. Pilgrims who witness Battle Sisters in their distinctive armor, conducting prayer services or training exercises, often describe these encounters as profoundly moving experiences that strengthen their faith. The Order's Hospitaller, another branch of the Adepta Sororitas, operates extensive medical facilities on shrine worlds to care for sick and injured pilgrims. These hospices treat conditions ranging from injuries sustained during long journeys to diseases contracted in the crowded conditions of pilgrimage sites. The Sisters Hospitaller view their medical work as a form of worship, believing that healing the Emperor's faithful servants honors him directly. Their facilities typically occupy positions near major shrines, allowing pilgrims to receive treatment without traveling far from the holy sites they came to visit. The quality of care provided by the Order's Hospitaller generally exceeds that available on most Imperial worlds, as the Sisters combine advanced medical knowledge with faith-based healing practices that sometimes produce results conventional medicine cannot explain. The movement of pilgrims across the Imperium represents one of the largest sustained migrations of human populations in galactic history. Every year, billions of faithful depart their home worlds, seeking the spiritual transformation that only direct contact with sacred sites can provide. This constant flow of humanity creates economic systems, social structures, and logistical challenges that rival the complexities of Imperial military campaigns. Unlike the regimented movement of Imperial Guard forces or the carefully planned trade routes of merchant fleets, pilgrimage operates through a combination of ancient tradition, ecclesiastical oversight, and the desperate faith of individuals willing to risk everything for a chance to walk on holy ground. Warp route navigation for pilgrim vessels follows established paths maintained by the Navis Nobilite, though the quality and safety of these routes varies dramatically depending on location and political circumstances. Major pilgrimage corridors connecting populous sectors to significant shrine worlds receive regular attention from navigator houses, with multiple vessels traversing these paths weekly or even daily. The Ecclesiarchy pays substantial fees to ensure these routes remain viable, recognizing that any disruption to pilgrimage traffic threatens both the Ministerum's revenue and its spiritual authority. Lesser routes to minor shrine worlds or those passing through unstable regions might see only occasional traffic, with gaps of months or years between pilgrim vessels. These journeys carry considerably higher risks, as warp storms can render previously safe routes impassable without warning, stranding pilgrim fleets in real space, or condemning them to drift through the Imperium until their supplies run out. The organization of pilgrim fleets reflects the Imperium's rigid class hierarchies and the vast disparities in wealth that characterize Imperial society. At the highest tier, noble families and wealthy merchants travel in private vessels, often converted trader ships or repurposed military craft equipped with luxurious quarters and extensive amenities. These ships carry hundreds rather than millions, with passengers enjoying spacious cabins, regular meals prepared by skilled cooks, and access to chapels where shipboard priests conduct daily services. The journey remains dangerous, as all warp travel carries inherent risks, but these privileged pilgrims face far better odds of survival than their less fortunate counterparts. Many noble families maintain hereditary traditions of pilgrimage, with each generation expected to visit specific shrine worlds and document their experiences in family chronicles that span millennia. The middle tiers of pilgrimage consist of chartered vessels operated by licensed pilgrim brokers, individuals or organizations authorized by the Ecclesiarchy to transport the faithful across the void. These ships range from relatively well-maintained freighters to barely space-worthy hulks that should have been scrapped centuries ago. Passengers on chartered pilgrim vessels typically purchase passage through years of labor or by selling everything they own, committing their life savings to a journey that might kill them long before they reach their destination. Conditions aboard these ships vary wildly depending on the broker's ethics and business model. Some maintain basic standards of hygiene and provide minimal rations sufficient to keep passengers alive, while others pack humans into cargo holds with no sanitation facilities and barely enough food and water to prevent immediate starvation. Pilgrim hulks represent the lowest tier of transport, massive vessels designed specifically to move enormous numbers of people across interstellar distances with minimal concern for their comfort or survival. These ships dwarf most Imperial Navy cruisers, their holds capable of containing millions of pilgrims in conditions that would horrify even hardened Imperial Guard veterans. The Ecclesiarchy licenses pilgrim hulk operators through a system of hereditary contracts, with certain families holding rights to specific routes for generations. These operators view their cargo as a renewable resource, calculating acceptable death rates based on profit margins and the steady supply of new pilgrims willing to take their chances. A typical pilgrim hulk journey might begin with 5 million passengers and arrive at its destination with 3 million survivors, the rest having died from disease, malnutrition, violence among passengers, or the psychological trauma of extended warp exposure. The physical layout of pilgrim hulks reflects their brutal efficiency. Vast holds stretching kilometers in length contain tier after tier of metal shelving, with each pilgrim allocated a space roughly 2 meters long and 1 meter wide. Families crowd together on these shelves, surrounded by thousands of strangers in identical circumstances. The air reeks of unwashed bodies, human waste, and the chemical preservatives used to extend the shelf life of ration bars. Lighting comes from flickering luminators spaced far apart, creating pools of dim illumination separated by stretches of near-total darkness. The constant vibration of the ship's engines and the groaning of metal under stress provide an unending background noise that makes sleep difficult and conversation exhausting. Sanitation aboard pilgrim hulks operates through crude but functional systems. Waste chutes run along the edges of each hold, emptying into processing tanks where bacteria break down organic matter into components that can be recycled or vented into space. Lines form at these chutes, with pilgrims waiting hours for their turn while trying to ignore the stench and the sounds of sickness from those ahead of them. Water rationing means that washing becomes a luxury reserved for the wealthy few who can bribe crew members for extra allocations. Most pilgrims go weeks or months without bathing, their bodies covered in grime and their clothes stiff with accumulated sweat and dirt. Food distribution follows rigid schedules enforced by armed crew members who patrol the holds with shock mauls and shotguns. Twice daily, pilgrims queue for their rations, typically consisting of compressed protein bars made from recycled organic matter and cups of water treated with chemicals that leave a metallic aftertaste. The nutritional content suffices to prevent immediate starvation, but leaves passengers in a constant state of hunger, their bodies slowly consuming their own muscle mass as the journey drags on. Wealthier pilgrims supplement these meager rations through a black market operated by corrupt crew members, trading jewelry, family heirlooms, or sexual favors for additional food, better water, or medications to treat the diseases that spread rapidly through the crowded holds. Violence represents a constant threat in the pilgrim hulk environment. Desperate people crammed together with no privacy and minimal resources inevitably come into conflict over perceived slights, competition for better shelf space, or simple mental breakdowns triggered by the stress of the journey. Murders occur regularly, with bodies often going undiscovered for days until the smell alerts nearby pilgrims. The crew makes minimal effort to investigate these deaths, viewing them as inevitable consequences of the conditions and accepting them as part of the calculated death rate. Some pilgrim hulks develop internal hierarchies among passengers, with strong individuals or groups claiming control over sections of holds and extracting tribute from weaker pilgrims in exchange for protection. These arrangements operate with tacit crew approval, as they reduce overall violence and make the passengers easier to manage. The psychological effects of warp travel hit pilgrim hulk passengers particularly hard. Unlike naval personnel or wealthy travelers who benefit from gellar field protection throughout their vessels, pilgrims in the deep holds often experience partial exposure to the Imperium. The gellar fields protecting pilgrim hulks typically cover only essential areas and crew quarters, with the passenger holds receiving minimal shielding that reduces but does not eliminate warp influence. Pilgrims report nightmares of impossible intensity, waking visions of demons or dead loved ones, and periods of lost time where hours or days pass without memory. Some go permanently mad, requiring restraint or execution by crew members when they become violent. Others experience religious visions that they interpret as messages from the Emperor, emerging from the journey with fanatical conviction that makes them valuable assets to the Ecclesiarchy upon arrival. The duration of pilgrim journeys varies enormously depending on distance, route stability, and the quality of the vessel's navigator. A trip from one sector to an adjacent one might take only months if conditions favor rapid warp travel, while journeys across multiple segmentums can consume years or even decades of subjective time. The vagaries of warp travel mean that passengers often arrive at their destinations having aged differently than they expected, with some journeys passing in what feels like weeks, while the outside universe ages years, and others stretching subjectively for far longer than their real space duration would suggest. Families separated by pilgrimage sometimes reunite to find that one party has aged decades while the other remained relatively young, creating profound emotional and social complications. The economic impact of pilgrimage on shrine worlds dwarfs that of conventional tithes. Where industrial worlds provide manufactured goods and agri-worlds supply food, shrine worlds receive a constant influx of human beings who bring wealth, labor, and desperation in varying proportions. The Ecclesiarchy has developed sophisticated systems for extracting value from this flood of humanity, beginning the moment pilgrim vessels enter orbital space. Custom stations staffed by Ministorum officials process incoming ships, assessing fees based on passenger numbers and cargo contents. These fees ostensibly cover the cost of orbital traffic control and surface transport, but they generate substantial profits that flow directly into ecclesiastical coffers. Orbital stations surrounding major shrine worlds rank among the largest structures in Imperial space, rivaling naval dockyards and merchant hubs in scale and complexity. These facilities contain docking ports for hundreds of vessels simultaneously, with dedicated sections for different classes of pilgrim transport. Noble ships receive priority berthing and expedited processing, their passengers transferred to surface shuttles within hours of arrival. Chartered vessels wait days or weeks for available docking space, their passengers confined to their ships, while bureaucrats verify documentation and assess fees. Pilgrim hulks often spend months in orbital holding patterns, their passengers enduring additional hardship, while station administrators determine where and how to process such enormous numbers of arrivals. The processing of pilgrims through orbital facilities involves extensive documentation, medical screening, and financial assessment. Ministorum clerks record each pilgrim's name, home world, and stated purpose for pilgrimage, creating records that theoretically allow tracking of individuals throughout their stay. Medical servitors scan for obvious diseases or signs of chaos corruption, though the sheer volume of arrivals makes thorough examination impossible. Most pilgrims pass through these screenings in minutes, receiving stamps on documentation that authorizes their descent to the surface. Those flagged for additional scrutiny face interrogation by Ecclesiarchy officials, or, in serious cases, examination by members of the Adepta Sororitas trained to detect heretical taint. Surface facilities on shrine worlds operate as massive processing centers designed to channel millions of pilgrims toward holy sites while extracting maximum economic value from their presence. Spaceports dedicated exclusively to pilgrim traffic cover hundreds of square kilometers, with landing pads arranged in geometric patterns that allow efficient movement of shuttles between orbit and ground. From these spaceports, pilgrims enter a carefully designed system of checkpoints, markets, and accommodation facilities that separate them from their remaining wealth while directing them toward their spiritual destinations. The Ecclesiarchy maintains strict control over this infrastructure, licensing merchants and innkeepers while prohibiting unauthorized commercial activity that might divert revenue from approved channels. The Missionarius Galaxia, the missionary arm of the Adeptus Ministorum, plays a crucial role in organizing and maintaining the pilgrimage network across the Imperium. This organization operates way stations on worlds along major pilgrimage routes, providing rest stops where travelers can resupply, receive medical attention, and attend services before continuing their journeys. These way stations range from simple chapels with attached dormitories on minor worlds to vast complexes on important transit hubs, capable of housing millions of pilgrims simultaneously. The Missionarius Galaxia funds these facilities through a combination of ecclesiarchy allocations, donations from wealthy pilgrims, and fees charged for services. Staff at way stations include ordained priests, lay brothers and sisters who handle logistics and maintenance, and armed guards who protect against bandits or heretical groups that prey on vulnerable travelers. The social stratification visible in transit continues and intensifies upon arrival at shrine worlds. Wealthy pilgrims proceed directly to premium accommodations near major shrines, purchasing access to special viewing times when crowds thin and hiring personal guides to explain the significance of various holy sites. These privileged visitors complete their pilgrimages in days or weeks, experiencing carefully curated encounters with sacred spaces before departing for their next destination or returning home. Middle-tier pilgrims navigate a more challenging environment, competing for limited space in licensed hostels and joining massive queues that can take days to traverse. They witness the same holy sites as their wealthy counterparts, but from greater distances and amid crushing crowds that make contemplation difficult. The poorest pilgrims, those who survived passage aboard pilgrim hulks or walked overland from distant spaceports, often never reach the most sacred sites at all. The Ecclesiarchy maintains outer rings of lesser shrines and secondary relics specifically for these masses, locations where they can technically complete their pilgrimages without accessing the premium sites reserved for those who can afford appropriate fees. Many die before completing even these reduced pilgrimages, succumbing to diseases contracted during transit, starvation when their meager funds run out, or simple exhaustion after journeys that consumed years of their lives. The Ecclesiarchy views these deaths as martyrdoms of a sort, with the deceased having given everything in service to their faith. Their bodies feed into the ossuary systems, their bones cleaned and arranged in decorative patterns that future pilgrims will view as examples of devotion. The urban geography of shrine worlds defies the conventional patterns found across the Imperium's countless settled planets. Where hive worlds grow upward in desperate attempts to house billions within limited space, and forge worlds sprawl horizontally around massive industrial complexes, shrine world cities organize themselves entirely around the demands of faith and pilgrimage. The cathedral city represents the dominant urban form, with every structure, street, and public space designed to facilitate worship and channel pilgrims toward holy sites. These cities grow organically over centuries, each generation of builders adding new layers of religious architecture while maintaining sight lines towards central shrines and preserving processional routes that might have existed for millennia. The processional boulevards that form the arterial system of shrine cities stretch kilometers in width, dwarfing even the grandest thoroughfares of hive world nobility. These massive avenues serve as both transportation corridors and worship spaces, designed to accommodate millions of pilgrims moving simultaneously toward major shrines during high holy days. The Ecclesiarchy mandates specific proportions for processional construction, with width calculated based on expected pilgrim volume and length determined by the distance between significant religious sites. Surfaces consist of blessed stone or ceramite, often inlaid with devotional inscriptions that pilgrims read as they walk. Every 100 meters, the boulevards feature raised platforms where preachers deliver sermons to passing crowds, their voices amplified by vox casters mounted on tall poles topped with aquila symbols. The edges of processional boulevards host endless rows of commercial establishments catering to pilgrim needs. Licensed vendors sell devotional items ranging from simple prayer beads to elaborate reliquaries, their stalls arranged in strict order according to ministorum regulations. Food sellers offer ration bars blessed by priests, water drawn from holy fonts, and occasionally fresh provisions for those who can afford premium prices. Medical stations operated by lay members of the Ecclesiarchy treat injuries and illnesses, their services funded through mandatory tithes on commercial activity. Confession booths occupy regular intervals along the boulevards, small enclosed spaces where pilgrims can speak with priests about their sins and receive absolution. These booths operate constantly, with shifts of confessors rotating through to ensure availability at all hours. The hab blocks that house permanent residents of shrine cities reflect the same religious focus that dominates public spaces. Unlike the purely functional residential towers of hive worlds, shrine city hab blocks incorporate chapels, prayer halls, and shrines into their basic architecture. A typical residential tower might rise 50 stories, with every fifth floor dedicated entirely to worship spaces accessible to all residents. Individual hab units, while still cramped by necessity given the population densities involved, include small alcoves for personal shrines where families maintain altars to the emperor and favored saints. Building codes enforced by ecclesiarchal authorities mandate that no residential space can exist more than 5 minutes walk from a place of worship, ensuring that prayer remains constantly accessible to all inhabitants. The daily rhythms of shrine city life revolve around mandatory prayer schedules broadcast through the omnipresent Vox Caster network. These systems blanket entire cities in liturgical recitations, hymns, and calls to prayer that mark the passage of time more reliably than any chronometer. The first prayer broadcast occurs during the pre-dawn hours, rousing residents from sleep with solemn chants that build gradually in volume and intensity. Workers in manufactories, scribes in ministorum offices, and merchants in their stalls all pause their activities to recite required responses, their voices joining millions of others in synchronized devotion. 5 additional prayer times punctuate the day at intervals calculated by ecclesiarchal astronomers based on the planet's rotation and its relationship to Terra's solar cycle. Compliance with prayer schedules operates on principles of social pressure and religious conviction rather than formal enforcement, though the Ecclesiarchy maintains mechanisms to address persistent non-compliance. Neighbors observe each other's devotional practices, with communities developing informal hierarchies based on perceived piety. Families known for exceptional devotion receive preferential treatment in commercial transactions and social interactions, while those suspected of insufficient faith face ostracism and economic penalties. The Adepta Sororitas maintains offices in every Shrine City district, staffed by sisters who investigate reports of heretical behavior or inadequate devotion. Most citizens never interact directly with these offices, but their presence serves as a constant reminder that faith remains both a personal choice and a civic obligation. Public flagellation squares occupy prominent positions throughout shrine cities, typically located at intersections of major processional boulevards, where maximum visibility ensures their function as both spiritual practice and public theater. These squares feature raised platforms equipped with whipping posts, restraint frames, and other implements of penitential suffering. Citizens who feel burdened by sin or who seek to demonstrate exceptional devotion subject themselves to public flagellation, either self-administered or delivered by ordained flagellants who maintain this practice as their primary form of worship. The Ecclesiarchy views public penance as spiritually beneficial both for those who suffer and those who witness, believing that the sight of blood shed in the emperor's name strengthens faith and reminds viewers of the sacrifices required by true devotion. The crowds that gather in flagellation squares represent a cross-section of Shrine City society. Pilgrims watch with expressions ranging from horror to ecstatic approval, many having never witnessed such extreme demonstrations of faith on their home worlds. Permanent residents treat these displays with casual familiarity, pausing briefly in their daily routines to observe before moving on. Children grow up viewing flagellation as normal, their understanding of religious practice shaped by regular exposure to these public demonstrations. The Ministorum carefully regulates flagellation practices to prevent deaths that would waste useful citizens, with medical servitors stationed nearby to intervene if participants approach fatal blood loss or organ damage. The social hierarchy within shrine cities manifests physically through vertical stratification that mirrors but exceeds the class divisions of hive worlds. The ecclesiarchal elite occupy spire temples that dominate city skylines, their towers rising kilometers above the urban sprawl below. These structures combine residential quarters, administrative offices, and worship spaces in architectural complexes that function as self-contained communities. Cardinals and senior confessors maintain personal chapels decorated with priceless artwork and relics, their private devotions conducted in spaces more luxurious than entire hab blocks housing thousands of menial workers. Access to spire temples requires specific authorization, with multiple checkpoints staffed by armed guards who verify credentials and search visitors for weapons or contraband. The middle tiers of Shrine City society consist of Ministorum functionaries, licensed merchants, and skilled workers whose services support the endless flow of pilgrims. These individuals occupy mid-level hab blocks with marginally better conditions than those available to menial classes, including more reliable power supplies, superior water quality, and proximity to better stocked markets. Their work involves direct interaction with pilgrims, whether processing documentation, selling goods, or maintaining the physical infrastructure that keeps cities functional. Many families in this tier hold hereditary positions, passing skills and licenses down through generations in arrangements that provide stability but limit social mobility. A family of licensed relic vendors might maintain the same stall on the same processional boulevard for centuries, with each generation learning the business from their predecessors. The menial classes form the foundation of Shrine City society, performing the countless unglamorous tasks required to maintain urban environments housing billions. Shrine keepers clean and maintain the endless chapels, prayer halls, and temples that fill these cities, their work beginning before dawn and continuing past dusk. They scrub floors where millions of feet have tracked dirt and offerings, polish brass fixtures dulled by constant touch, and replace candles consumed in daily worship. Candle lighters represent a specialized subset of shrine keepers, responsible for maintaining the billions of votive candles that pilgrims purchase and light as offerings. These workers move through darkened temples with long tapers, reaching candelabras mounted high on walls, and ensuring that no shrine goes dark due to extinguished flames. Corpse handlers occupy the lowest rung of shrine city social hierarchies, their work involving the collection and processing of bodies from the constant stream of deaths that occur in any city of billions, amplified by the presence of sick and dying pilgrims. These workers patrol streets and hab blocks with push carts, collecting bodies reported by residents or discovered during their rounds. They transport corpses to processing facilities where other menial workers strip valuables, sort remains by social class, and prepare bodies for incorporation into ossuaries or recycling into corpse starch. The work carries significant stigma despite its necessity, with corpse handlers forming insular communities that rarely interact with other social classes. Many families in this profession have performed these duties for generations, trapped by social prejudice and lack of alternative opportunities. The infrastructure supporting billions of permanent residents and transient pilgrims requires constant maintenance and represents engineering achievements comparable to those of forge worlds or naval dockyards. Water systems on shrine worlds incorporate religious elements into practical necessity, with reclamation facilities blessed by tech priests and designed to process liquid through holy fonts before distribution. Pilgrims and residents alike draw water from public fountains built around religious themes, their basins carved with devotional inscriptions and topped with statues of saints or the emperor. The water itself, while processed through conventional filtration and purification systems, passes through fonts containing blessed oils and sacred relics that supposedly impart spiritual benefits. Whether these additions provide actual purification or simply psychological comfort remains debated among tech priests, but the Ecclesiarchy mandates their inclusion in all water distribution systems on shrine worlds. Food production on shrine worlds occurs primarily in monastery farms operated by lay religious orders dedicated to agricultural work as a form of worship. These facilities occupy vast tracts of land outside urban centers, their fields and greenhouses tended by thousands of workers who view farming as service to the emperor. The monastic orders follow strict schedules that integrate agricultural labor with prayer and study, their members rising before dawn for devotions before proceeding to fields or processing facilities. Production focuses on staple crops capable of feeding massive populations efficiently, with variety sacrificed for yield and reliability. Grains, tubers, and protein-rich legumes dominate cultivation, processed into ration bars and nutrient paste distributed through city markets. The monastery farms maintain their own internal hierarchies, with ordained overseers directing lay workers and coordinating production schedules. These agricultural communities often develop distinctive theological interpretations, viewing their work through metaphors of cultivation and harvest applied to spiritual development. Some orders practice extreme asceticism, believing that physical deprivation brings them closer to the emperor, while others adopt more moderate approaches that emphasize sustainable labor practices. The Ecclesiarchy monitors these communities for doctrinal drift, but generally allows considerable autonomy provided production quotas are met and no overtly heretical practices emerge. Sanitation systems on shrine worlds handle waste streams that would overwhelm the infrastructure of less developed planets, processing billions of tons of human waste, garbage, and organic matter annually. The Adeptus Mechanicus provides technical expertise for these systems, their tech priests designing networks of pipes, treatment facilities, and recycling plants that convert waste into usable products. However, the Ecclesiarchy insists on blessing all sanitation infrastructure, resulting in facilities that combine advanced technology with religious ritual. Treatment plants include chapels where workers pray before shifts, and major pipe junctions feature shrines to the emperor and the machine god. The tech priests assigned to shrine worlds often develop syncretic practices that blend mechanicus doctrine with imperial cult theology, their prayers invoking both the omnissiah and the god emperor while performing maintenance rituals. The recycling of organic waste into corpse starch and fertilizer operates on scales that dwarf similar processes on hive worlds, driven by the need to feed transient populations that can swell to double or triple baseline numbers during major pilgrimage seasons. Processing facilities receive bodies from corpse handlers, waste from sanitation systems, and organic refuse from markets and food vendors, combining these inputs into nutrient-rich outputs distributed back through the urban food supply. The Ecclesiarchy maintains that proper blessing transforms this recycled matter into acceptable sustenance, with priests conducting regular ceremonies at processing facilities to sanctify their operations. Most Shrine City residents understand intellectually that their food contains recycled human remains, but religious conditioning and practical necessity overcome any squeamishness about consumption. Power generation on shrine worlds typically relies on conventional sources including fusion reactors, geothermal plants, or solar collection arrays, depending on local conditions and available resources. The Mechanicus maintains these facilities under contract with the Ecclesiarchy, their tech priests ensuring reliable operation, while the Ministorum provides religious oversight. Power distribution prioritizes religious sites and ecclesiarchal facilities, with residential areas receiving service based on social class and proximity to important shrines. Blackouts in menial hab blocks occur regularly, accepted as normal inconveniences, while spire temples maintain independent backup systems, ensuring uninterrupted service. The Voxcaster networks that broadcast constant liturgies receive guaranteed power under all circumstances, their operation considered more essential than residential lighting or heating. Transportation within shrine cities combines pedestrian traffic, which dominates due to religious requirements for pilgrims to approach holy sites on foot, with limited vehicular systems reserved for cargo movement and elite travel. The Ecclesiarchy discourages mechanical transportation for pilgrims, believing that physical effort and hardship contribute to spiritual development. However, practical necessity requires cargo haulers to move food, water, and supplies through cities where walking between districts can consume entire days. These vehicles, typically heavy trucks or tracked haulers, operate on designated routes separate from processional boulevards, their movements scheduled to avoid disrupting major religious observances. The elite travel in enclosed carriages or ground cars, their passage through crowded streets facilitated by armed escorts who clear paths through pedestrian traffic. The governmental structure of shrine worlds represents one of the few instances where the Adeptus Ministorum exercises direct temporal authority within the Imperium. While the Ecclesiarchy wields enormous influence across all imperial territories through its control of religious doctrine and its ability to mobilize the faithful, most planets remain under the administrative control of the Adeptus Terra and its subordinate organizations. Planetary governors appointed by the Administratum manage the vast majority of imperial worlds, collecting tithes, maintaining order, and serving as the Emperor's representatives in secular matters. Shrine worlds operate under different principles entirely. The Decree Passive, issued by Sebastian Thor following the Age of Apostasy, stripped the Ecclesiarchy of its right to maintain men under arms, but this restriction came alongside tacit acknowledgement of Ministorum authority over specifically designated religious sites. The Adeptus Terra recognized that shrine worlds required specialized administration focused on their spiritual function rather than conventional economic or military productivity. Cardinals appointed by the Ecclesiarch and confirmed by the Synod Ministra serve as the supreme authorities on major shrine worlds, combining religious and governmental power in single individuals. These cardinals bear titles reflecting their planetary assignments, such as Cardinal of Gathalammer or Cardinal of Dimammer, and maintain positions within the broader ecclesiarchal hierarchy, while exercising near absolute control over their assigned worlds. A cardinal governing a shrine world commands resources that dwarf those available to most planetary governors, drawing on pilgrimage revenues that can exceed the gross planetary product of entire industrial worlds. This wealth translates into political influence within the ministorum, with cardinals of important shrine worlds forming a powerful voting bloc within the synod ministra and competing for appointment to the position of ecclesiarch when that office becomes vacant. The selection process for cardinals assigned to shrine worlds involves intense political maneuvering within the highest levels of the Adeptus Ministorum. Candidates typically rise through decades of service in lesser positions, demonstrating administrative competence, theological orthodoxy, and political acumen. A typical path might begin with ordination as a simple priest, followed by advancement to confessor status, then appointment as abbot of a significant monastery or prelate of a populous diocese. From these positions, ambitious clergy cultivate relationships with more senior figures, participate in theological debates that demonstrate their intellectual capabilities, and take on special assignments that showcase their talents. The final appointment requires approval from the ecclesiarch, who considers recommendations from existing cardinals, reports from the order's dialogus regarding the candidate's doctrinal purity, and political calculations about factional balance within the synod ministra. Archconfessors occupy positions subordinate to cardinals, but superior to ordinary clergy, serving as regional administrators responsible for specific geographic areas or functional domains within shrine world governance. An archconfessor might oversee all pilgrimage processing facilities in a particular continent-sized region, coordinate the activities of missionary orders operating from the shrine world, or manage the economic enterprises that generate revenue for the ecclesiarchy. These positions require individuals capable of handling complex logistics while maintaining the religious focus that justifies ministorum authority. Archconfessors typically maintain personal staffs including junior priests, lay administrators, and armed guards, creating miniature bureaucracies that mirror the structure of the cardinal's central administration. Competition for archconfessor appointments remains fierce, as these positions represent crucial steps toward potential elevation to cardinal status. Abbots and abbesses control the monastery complexes that dot shrine world landscapes, governing communities of ordained and lay religious who dedicate their lives to prayer, study, and service. These monastic establishments vary enormously in size and function. Small contemplative monasteries might house a few dozen individuals focused entirely on theological study and devotional practices, their members rarely interacting with the outside world. Large monastery farms employ thousands of workers who combine agricultural labor with religious observance, producing food for urban populations while maintaining rigorous prayer schedules. Military monasteries affiliated with the Adepta Sororitas train novices for the order's militant, their abbesses overseeing brutal physical conditioning programs integrated with theological instruction. The abbots and abbesses governing these diverse institutions answer directly to archconfessors, or, in some cases, to the cardinal personally, depending on the monastery's importance and historical connections. The fraterist clergy hierarchy on shrine worlds extends from humble parish preachers serving individual neighborhoods to cardinals who govern entire planets, creating a complex web of authority, obligation, and patronage. At the base of this hierarchy, ordained priests minister to permanent residents in local chapels and shrines, conducting daily services, hearing confessions, and providing spiritual guidance. These parish priests typically come from the local population, having shown aptitude for religious service during their youth, and receive training at seminary facilities operated by the Ecclesiarchy. Their positions carry modest prestige and provide basic support from church revenues, but most parish priests live in conditions barely better than their congregants, occupying small quarters attached to their assigned chapels and subsisting on simple rations supplemented by offerings from parishioners. Confessors represent a higher grade of clergy, distinguished from ordinary priests by additional training in theology, rhetoric, and the detection of heresy. The Ecclesiarchy assigns confessors to positions requiring greater authority or specialized knowledge, including service aboard naval vessels, attachment to Imperial Guard regiments, or oversight of multiple parishes within a district. On shrine worlds, confessors often serve as intermediaries between parish priests and higher ecclesiastical authorities, conducting inspections to ensure doctrinal compliance and investigating reports of heretical activity. The order's dialogus, the investigative and scholarly branch of the Adeptus Sororitas, maintains close relationships with confessors assigned to counter heresy duties, providing resources and expertise for complex cases that might indicate chaos, corruption, or Xeno's influence. Prelates govern ecclesiastical districts encompassing dozens or hundreds of individual parishes, coordinating the activities of multiple confessors and ordinary priests, while managing the economic and administrative functions necessary to maintain religious infrastructure. A typical prelate oversees a geographic area containing millions of residents and manages budgets derived from tithes, commercial licenses, and shares of pilgrimage revenues. These positions require individuals capable of balancing spiritual leadership with practical administration, as prelates must ensure both the doctrinal purity of clergy under their authority and the financial solvency of their districts. Prelates report to archconfessors or directly to the cardinal's central administration, submitting regular reports on conditions within their districts and requesting resources or guidance when situations exceed their authority to resolve independently. The relationship between Shrine World clergy and the central ecclesiarchal authority on Terra operates through formal channels maintained by the Synod Ministra, the Council of Cardinals that governs the Adeptus Ministorum alongside the Ecclesiarch. Cardinals governing Shrine Worlds maintain permanent representatives on Terra, typically senior priests or confessors who advocate for their patrons' interests and relay information about political developments within the Ministorum. These representatives occupy offices in the Ecclesiarchal Palace, the massive complex on Terra that serves as the administrative heart of the Imperial cult. They attend sessions of the Synod Ministra when their patrons cannot travel to Terra personally, casting proxy votes on matters requiring collective decision-making. The Synod meets irregularly, convening when the Ecclesiarch summons it to address major theological controversies, approve canonizations, or coordinate responses to threats facing the Ecclesiarchy. Communication between Shrine Worlds and Terra relies on astropathic transmission for urgent matters and physical courier for detailed reports or sensitive information. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica maintains dedicated facilities on major Shrine Worlds, their astropaths bound to service contracts with the Ecclesiarchy and trained to handle the specific terminology and security protocols required for religious communications. Cardinals dispatch astropathic messages to Terra when seeking guidance on theological questions, reporting major incidents that might affect the broader Imperium, or participating in political maneuvering within the Synod Ministra. The unreliability of astropathic communication means that cardinals must often make decisions without current guidance from Terra, exercising their authority based on established precedent and their understanding of Ministorum doctrine. This autonomy creates opportunities for divergence in practice between different Shrine Worlds, with local traditions developing that might not receive formal approval, but become too entrenched to easily suppress. The economic model sustaining Shrine Worlds differs fundamentally from the resource extraction, manufacturing, or agricultural production that supports most Imperial planets. Shrine Worlds produce faith, manifested in forms that generate tangible wealth for the Ecclesiarchy while serving spiritual functions for pilgrims and residents. Pilgrimage offerings represent the most direct source of revenue, with visitors donating money, valuables, or labor to demonstrate devotion and seek the Emperor's favor. The Ministorum operates collection systems throughout shrine cities, placing offering boxes at every chapel, shrine, and holy site. Pilgrims deposit coins, jewelry, or promissory notes drawn on accounts maintained by banking guilds on their home worlds. The Ecclesiarchy employs specialized clergy to count and categorize these offerings, sorting valuables by type and assessing their worth before transferring them to secure vaults or converting them into more liquid assets. Tithes of devotion function as mandatory contributions required from all permanent residents of shrine worlds, calculated as percentages of income or fixed amounts based on social class. Unlike the imperial tithe collected by the administratum for the broader Imperium, devotion tithes flow directly to the Ecclesiarchy and fund local operations including clergy salaries, building maintenance, and charitable works. The Ministorum maintains extensive records tracking individual compliance with tithe obligations, with local priests reporting delinquent payers to higher authorities. Persistent failure to meet tithe obligations can result in exclusion from religious services, social ostracism, or in extreme cases, investigation for heresy based on the assumption that insufficient financial support indicates inadequate faith. The sale of indulgences represents a controversial but lucrative practice that the Ecclesiarchy justifies through complex theological arguments about the remission of sins and the emperor's mercy. Wealthy pilgrims and residents purchase documents certified by ordained clergy that supposedly reduce their time in purgatorial suffering or guarantee more favorable treatment in the afterlife. The Ministorum maintains strict controls over indulgence issuance, limiting the authority to grant them to confessors and higher ranks while establishing standard pricing based on the severity of sins being absolved. Critics within the Imperium, particularly among the Adeptus Mechanicus and certain Imperial Guard commanders who favor more martial interpretations of faith, view indulgence sales as corrupt practices that undermine genuine devotion. However, the Ecclesiarchy defends the system as providing spiritual benefits while generating funds necessary for maintaining the infrastructure of faith across the galaxy. Blessed artifacts and holy relics generate enormous revenues through sales to pilgrims seeking tangible connections to sacred sites and saints. The Ministorum operates workshops staffed by artisans who produce countless items including prayer beads, devotional texts, icons, and small reliquaries containing fragments supposedly taken from holy remains or locations. The Ecclesiarchy maintains elaborate systems for authenticating these items, with different grades of blessing corresponding to different price points. Simple prayer beads might receive mass blessing from junior priests, making them affordable for even poor pilgrims, while elaborate reliquaries containing fragments of saints' bones undergo individual consecration by cardinals and sell for prices that only wealthy nobles can afford. The authenticity of relics remains a constant concern, as the demand far exceeds any plausible supply of genuine artifacts, but the Ministorum argues that the faith invested in an object matters more than its literal provenance. Off-world investments provide the Ecclesiarchy with income streams independent of pilgrimage traffic, insulating shrine world economies from fluctuations in visitor numbers caused by warp storms, military conflicts, or economic downturns affecting source populations. The Ministorum maintains investment portfolios, including ownership stakes in merchant fleets, manufacturing enterprises on industrial worlds, and agricultural operations on agri-worlds. These investments generate dividends and interest payments that flow to ecclesiarchal treasuries, providing steady income that supplements the more volatile revenues from pilgrimage activities. Cardinals governing shrine worlds compete to secure favorable investment opportunities, using their political connections within the Ministorum and relationships with other imperial institutions to identify profitable ventures. The most successful cardinals transform their shrine worlds into economic powerhouses that rival the wealth of sector capitals, using financial leverage to expand their political influence within the Ecclesiarchy. The military forces garrisoning shrine worlds reflect the restrictions imposed by the decree passive, while acknowledging the necessity of defending sites of immense spiritual and economic importance. The Adeptus Sororitas provides the primary military presence on major shrine worlds, their orders militant maintaining commanderies that house hundreds or thousands of battle sisters. These facilities combine fortress architecture with religious symbolism, their walls decorated with devotional murals, while mounting serious defensive weapons, including missile batteries, las cannons, and void shields. The sisters stationed at Shrine World Commanderies perform multiple functions, including security operations, training of novices, and participation in religious ceremonies, where their presence reinforces the martial aspects of Imperial faith. The Adepta Sororitas answers to the Ecclesiarchy, but maintains its own command structure, with canonesses leading individual commanderies and reporting to the Order's central leadership, rather than directly to Shrine World Cardinals. Frateris Militia represents a more problematic military force, technically complying with the decree passive's prohibition on men under arms, while providing the Ecclesiarchy with large numbers of armed fighters. These militia units consist of fanatical volunteers who take up weapons in defense of their faith, organized by local priests and confessors, but not formally part of the Ministerum's command structure. The distinction between an official military force and an armed mob of religious zealots allows the Ecclesiarchy to maintain that it observes the letter of the decree passive, while deploying significant combat power when necessary. Frateris militia quality varies wildly, from barely trained civilians wielding improvised weapons to well-equipped forces that receive covert training from retired Imperial Guard veterans or Sororitas instructors. During emergencies, cardinals can mobilize tens of thousands of militia fighters within days, their fanaticism compensating somewhat for their lack of professional military training. Ecclesiarchal Guard regiments occupy an ambiguous position within the post-decree passive military landscape. These units, typically recruited from Shrine World populations and trained to professional standards, officially serve as ceremonial guards for cardinals and major shrines rather than combat forces. They wear elaborate uniforms combining military functionality with religious symbolism, carry weapons blessed by senior clergy, and undergo training that emphasizes discipline and loyalty alongside combat skills. In practice, ecclesiarchal guards function as light infantry capable of serious military operations, though the Ministerum carefully avoids deploying them in ways that might provoke accusations of violating the decree passive. The guards maintain security within shrine cities, protect high-ranking clergy during travel, and defend religious sites against threats that don't require Sororitas' intervention. Their numbers remain limited compared to Imperial Guard regiments or the forces that the Ecclesiarchy commanded before the Age of Apostasy, but they provide cardinals with reliable military assets directly under ecclesiastical control. The restrictions following the Age of Apostasy continue to shape Shrine World military arrangements nearly 4,000 years after Sebastian Thor's reforms. The Ecclesiarchy cannot maintain formal armies, cannot command Imperial Guard regiments except through influence rather than direct authority, and must rely on the Adepta Sororitas and various workarounds to provide military security for its holdings. These limitations prevent the Ministerum from threatening the broader Imperium's stability as it did under Goj Vander, when the Ecclesiarchy commanded millions of fanatical soldiers and nearly tore the Imperium apart during the civil war that ended his reign. However, the restrictions also create vulnerabilities, as Shrine Worlds often lack sufficient military forces to defend against serious threats. When Xenos raiders or Chaos Warbands attack Shrine Worlds, the Ecclesiarchy must request assistance from the Imperial Guard, Space Marine chapters, or Imperial Navy, accepting temporary subordination to military authorities in exchange for protection. Cardinals resent this dependence, viewing it as an insult to the Ministerum's dignity and a practical weakness that threatens holy sites, but the political realities established by the decree passive leave them no alternative beyond the limited forces they can maintain through creative interpretation of its restrictions. The regulation of prayer on Shrine Worlds operates through systems that would seem oppressive on less devout planets, but function as natural extensions of faith in these sacred spaces. The day begins before dawn with the first adoration, broadcast through voxcasters that penetrate every hab block, workshop, and temple. The amplified voices of senior clergy recite liturgies that have remained unchanged for millennia, their words echoing across cities housing billions. Residents rise from their sleeping pallets, many having slept in their clothes due to cramped conditions or the need to respond immediately to prayer calls. They kneel beside their beds or stand in whatever space they occupy, joining their voices to the broadcast prayers. The first adoration lasts approximately 30 minutes, during which all activity ceases except in facilities maintaining critical infrastructure like water treatment or power generation, where workers recite prayers while continuing their duties. The Ministorum maintains detailed records of prayer compliance through a network of observers including block wardens, shrine keepers, and members of the fraterist clergy assigned to residential districts. These individuals note absences during mandatory prayer times, recording names and HAB unit numbers of those who fail to participate. A single missed prayer might result in a warning delivered by a local priest, while repeated absences trigger escalating consequences. The Ecclesiarchy views consistent non-participation as evidence of insufficient faith, potentially indicating heretical tendencies that require investigation. Penalties for persistent non-compliance range from public penance assignments to formal interrogation by confessors trained in detecting doctrinal deviation. The midday genuflection interrupts work across shrine worlds at the moment when the local star reaches its zenith, a timing calculated by ecclesiarchal astronomers and adjusted for seasonal variations. Workers in manufactories producing devotional items cease their tasks, artisans crafting reliquaries set down their tools, and merchants in pilgrimage markets pause their transactions. The genuflection itself involves a specific physical posture, kneeling with forehead touching the ground, arms extended forward in supplication. The broadcast prayers during this period emphasize humanity's unworthiness before the God Emperor and the necessity of constant vigilance against sin. The midday genuflection runs shorter than the first adoration, typically 15 to 20 minutes, acknowledging the practical need to maintain economic activity while still demanding regular demonstrations of faith. Vespers mark the transition from day to night, their timing varying with planetary rotation, but always occurring as darkness falls. This prayer cycle carries particular significance in ecclesiarchal theology, representing the soul's journey through the darkness of mortality toward the Emperor's light. The liturgies recited during Vespers include passages from the Lectitio Divinitatis, the foundational text of the Imperial cult, and specific prayers appropriate to the shrine world's patron saint or primary holy site. On Gathalammer, Vespers incorporate remembrances of Saint Gathalammer's martyrdom, while on Dimammer the prayers reference Lord Solar, Macharius's military victories. Residents gather in local chapels when possible, creating congregations that fill worship spaces to capacity. Those unable to reach chapels due to work obligations or physical infirmity recite prayers in their homes, their voices joining the broader chorus that rises from entire cities simultaneously. The enforcement of prayer compliance operates through social mechanisms as much as formal penalties. Neighbors observe each other's devotional practices, creating informal hierarchies of piety that affect daily interactions and opportunities. Families known for exceptional attendance at prayer times receive preferential treatment from merchants, better positions in queues for limited resources, and greater respect from local clergy. Conversely, those suspected of inadequate devotion face subtle discrimination that compounds over time. Merchants might claim their best goods have sold out when approached by families with poor prayer records. Shrine keepers assign less desirable tasks to workers from households flagged for non-compliance. Children from devout families receive priority in selection for training programs that lead to better employment opportunities. The specialized devotional practices that distinguish different shrine worlds reflect local traditions developed over centuries of worship, often incorporating elements from the lives and martyrdoms of patron saints. Mass flagellation ceremonies occur on scheduled dates throughout the year, drawing participants who seek to demonstrate extraordinary devotion or atone for serious sins. These events transform public squares into theaters of suffering, where hundreds or thousands of participants simultaneously inflict pain upon themselves under the supervision of ordained flagellants. The ceremonies follow strict protocols established by the Ecclesiarchy to prevent deaths while ensuring sufficient bloodshed to satisfy theological requirements. Participants use standardized whips constructed from blessed materials, their lashes tipped with small metal barbs that tear skin without causing deep tissue damage. Medical servitors stationed around the squares monitor participants, intervening when individuals approach dangerous levels of blood loss or show signs of infection that might prove fatal without treatment. The crowds observing flagellation ceremonies include pilgrims experiencing these practices for the first time, their reactions varying from shock to inspired fervor. Some visitors from less extreme worlds struggle with the graphic violence, turning away or departing early despite social pressure to witness the entire ceremony. Others find themselves moved by the demonstrations, interpreting the suffering as proof of genuine faith that shames their own more modest devotions. The Ecclesiarchy encourages this latter response, viewing flagellation ceremonies as tools for strengthening faith across the broader Imperium. Pilgrims who witness these practices return to their home worlds carrying stories that spread through their communities, potentially inspiring local adoption of similar customs, or at minimum reinforcing the authority of the Imperial cult. Penitent crawls represent another distinctive practice found primarily on shrine worlds, with significant elevation changes or long distances between related holy sites. These devotional journeys require participants to traverse sacred routes on hands and knees, often covering kilometers of rough terrain while reciting prayers and dragging chains attached to their ankles. The most famous penitent routes include the Ascent of Sorrows on an unnamed shrine world in the Segmentum Pacificus, where faithful climb 3,000 meters of mountain path on their knees to reach a monastery built around the cave where a martyred saint hid from heretics before her capture. The journey takes days to complete, with participants sleeping on the path and subsisting on minimal rations. Many suffer permanent knee damage, their joints destroyed by the constant friction and impact against stone. The Ecclesiarchy views these injuries as badges of devotion, physical proof of sacrifice that marks individuals as especially faithful. The roots themselves become sacred through centuries of use, their stones worn smooth by the passage of countless penitents. The Ministorum maintains these paths, repairing damage from weather or geological shifts while preserving their essential character. Shrine keepers clean the routes regularly, removing debris that might injure crawling penitents while leaving the fundamental difficulty intact. Small shrines mark significant points along major penitent routes, offering places where participants can pause for prayer without abandoning their crawl. These waypoint shrines contain offerings left by previous penitents, including prayer beads, devotional texts, and occasionally more valuable items like jewelry or family heirlooms. The Ecclesiarchy collects these offerings periodically, sorting them into categories for sale, display in museums of faith, or incorporation into reliquaries. Immersion in holy waters represents a practice found on shrine worlds blessed with natural springs, rivers, or lakes that the Ecclesiarchy has sanctified through association with saints or miracles. These bodies of water receive constant liturgical attention, with priests conducting daily blessings and tech priests monitoring their purity to ensure they remain safe for human contact. Pilgrims queue for hours or days to access immersion pools constructed around these sacred waters, their patience tested by crowds that can number in the tens of thousands during peak pilgrimage seasons. The pools themselves vary in design from simple excavations lined with blessed stone to elaborate architectural complexes with multiple chambers for different social classes. Wealthy pilgrims purchase access to premium pools where they immerse in relative privacy, while the masses share large communal basins where hundreds bathe simultaneously. The theology surrounding water immersion emphasizes purification from sin and spiritual renewal through contact with substances touched by the Emperor's grace. The Ecclesiarchy teaches that sacred waters carry traces of divine power, capable of washing away the taint of sin and strengthening souls against heretical temptation. The physical effects of immersion vary depending on water temperature, mineral content, and the duration of exposure. Some sacred springs run cold enough to cause hypothermia if pilgrims remain submerged too long, while others contain minerals that irritate skin or cause digestive problems if swallowed. The Ministorum views these discomforts as spiritually beneficial, believing that suffering during purification rituals demonstrates genuine commitment to faith. Oil anointment ceremonies occur less frequently than water immersion, but carry greater significance in ecclesiarchal hierarchy. These rituals use blessed oils prepared through processes involving prayers, rare ingredients, and extended consecration periods. The oils themselves vary in composition, with different formulations designated for specific purposes including healing, protection against chaos corruption, or preparation for martyrdom. Senior clergy administer oil anointment to individuals deemed worthy through exceptional service or those facing situations requiring divine protection. Battle sisters receive oil anointment before deploying to particularly dangerous war zones, the ceremony conducted by canonesses or celestians who invoke the emperor's protection while marking the warriors' foreheads with sacred oils. The Ministorum strictly controls oil production and distribution, maintaining monopolies that prevent unauthorized individuals from creating or administering these substances. The sacraments administered by the priesthood structure individual lives from birth through death, creating frameworks that integrate imperial citizens into the religious community while reinforcing ecclesiastical authority. Baptism in aqua sanctified occurs within days of birth for children born on shrine worlds, their parents bringing infants to local chapels where priests perform cleansing rituals. The ceremony involves partial immersion in water blessed by senior clergy and treated with chemical compounds that supposedly enhance its purifying properties. The priest recites prayers invoking the emperor's protection over the child while making the sign of the aquila on the infant's forehead. Parents provide offerings scaled to their economic circumstances, with wealthy families donating substantial sums while the poor contribute whatever they can spare. The Ecclesiarchy maintains records of all baptisms, creating documentation that follows individuals throughout their lives and serves as proof of their status as faithful imperial citizens. Confession rituals occur regularly throughout the lives of Shrine World residents, with the Ministorum mandating minimum frequencies based on social class and occupation. Menial workers must confess monthly, while those in positions of greater responsibility or authority face weekly requirements. The confessional booths scattered throughout shrine cities provide private spaces where individuals kneel before screened windows and reveal their sins to priests who listen without showing their faces. The anonymity supposedly encourages honest disclosure, though many residents suspect that confessors recognize regular penitents by voice or the specific sins they habitually confess. The priests assign penances scaled to the severity of sins, ranging from additional prayers to physical mortifications like flagellation or extended fasting. Serious sins including violence, theft, or expressions of doubt about imperial doctrine trigger reports to higher ecclesiastical authorities who investigate whether the confessor requires more intensive spiritual correction. The granting of benedictions to pilgrims completing their journeys represents the culmination of travels that might have consumed years of their lives and cost them everything they owned. These ceremonies occur at the primary shrines that drew pilgrims to the shrine world, conducted by clergy whose rank reflects the importance of the holy site. A parish priest might grant benedictions at a minor shrine, while cardinals personally administer blessings to pilgrims completing visits to the most significant locations. The ceremony involves the pilgrim kneeling before the priest, who recites prayers acknowledging their devotion and invoking the emperor's favor upon their return journey. The priest marks the pilgrim's forehead with blessed oils or water, creating a visible sign of their completed pilgrimage. Many pilgrims weep during these ceremonies, overcome by emotions combining relief at surviving their journey, spiritual fulfillment from achieving their goal, and apprehension about the return trip that still lies ahead. Festival days punctuate the calendar, with celebrations that transform shrine cities into stages for elaborate displays of faith and ecclesiastical power. Saints' feast days commemorate the births, martyrdoms, or significant achievements of canonized figures, with specific shrine worlds celebrating their patron saints with particular fervor. The feast day of Saint Gathalamar on the world bearing her name draws additional millions of pilgrims beyond normal traffic, swelling the planet's population to levels that strain even its extensive infrastructure. The celebrations last multiple days, featuring processions where clergy carry reliquaries containing the saints, remains through crowded streets, while billions of observers pray and sing hymns. The Adeptus Sororitas participates prominently in these processions, their battle sisters marching in perfect formation while carrying banners depicting the saints' iconography. Martyrdom anniversaries mark the dates when saints died in service to the emperor, transforming their deaths into celebrations of sacrifice and devotion, rather than occasions for mourning. The theology underlying these observances emphasizes that martyrdom represents the highest achievement possible for mortals, the moment when an individual's faith proves absolute through their willingness to die rather than betray the god emperor. The ceremonies include dramatic reenactments of the martyrdom, with actors portraying the saint and their persecutors in performances that combine religious instruction with entertainment. These miracle plays draw enormous crowds, their audiences watching from packed plazas as performers depict the events leading to the saint's death. The productions emphasize the saints' courage, the cruelty of their enemies, and the divine intervention that often accompanied their final moments. The plays conclude with the martyrdom itself, staged with varying degrees of graphic realism depending on local traditions and the preferences of clergy overseeing the performances. Public executions of heretics form integral components of major festival celebrations, serving both practical and symbolic functions. The Ecclesiarchy accumulates prisoners throughout the year, individuals convicted of crimes against faith including blasphemy, heresy, or practicing forbidden religions. Rather than executing these criminals immediately, the Ministorum holds them in ecclesiastical prisons until appropriate festival dates when their deaths can serve maximum didactic purpose. The executions occur in prominent public spaces, with condemned individuals displayed on raised platforms where crowds can witness their final moments. The methods of execution vary based on the nature of the heresy and local tradition, ranging from hanging or beheading for relatively minor offenses to burning for serious theological crimes. The Ecclesiarchy views these executions as necessary demonstrations of the consequences awaiting those who stray from orthodoxy, believing that witnessing the deaths of heretics strengthens the faith of observers while deterring potential future transgressions. Imperial calendar events, including the Feast of the Emperor's Ascension and the Day of Foundation, receive elaborate observances on all shrine worlds, their celebrations coordinated across the Imperium through astropathic communication from Terra. These universal holy days unite the faithful across countless worlds in simultaneous worship, creating moments when billions pray in unison despite the vast distances separating them. The Feast of the Emperor's Ascension commemorates his internment in the Golden Throne following his battle with Horus, marking the moment when the emperor transcended mortal existence to become the god emperor worshipped by the imperial cult. The observances combine mourning for the emperor's physical suffering with celebration of his divine apotheosis, their emotional complexity reflected in liturgies that alternate between sorrowful laments and triumphant hymns. Shrine worlds experience these celebrations with particular intensity, their populations already steeped in faith responding to these occasions with fervor that can border on mass hysteria. The first contact between pilgrims and shrine world authorities occurs in orbital space, where massive quarantine stations intercept incoming vessels before they can approach planetary surfaces. These facilities orbit at distances calculated to provide adequate reaction time should arriving ships carry contagion or harbor hostile forces. The stations themselves represent significant engineering achievements, their structures combining defensive capabilities with processing facilities designed to handle millions of arrivals annually. Weapon batteries cover all approach vectors, their targeting systems controlled by tech priests who maintain constant vigilance against potential threats. The Adeptus Mechanicus provides technical expertise for these installations, while the Ecclesiarchy maintains operational control, creating arrangements that sometimes generate friction between the two organizations over questions of authority and procedure. Incoming pilgrim vessels receive instructions to hold position while station personnel conduct initial assessments. Augur arrays scan ships for signs of warp contamination, biological hazards, or unauthorized weapons that might threaten planetary security. The scans operate through multiple redundant systems, their machine spirits calibrated to detect anomalies that human observers might miss. Tech priests analyze the data streams, looking for energy signatures consistent with chaos corruption or Xenos technology. Simultaneously, astropaths assigned to quarantine duty probe the vessels psychically, searching for demonic presences or psychic disturbances that augurs cannot detect. This dual-layer screening catches most serious threats, though the sheer volume of traffic means that dangerous individuals or objects occasionally slip through despite precautions. Ships that pass initial screening receive docking assignments based on their classification and the social status of their passengers. Noble vessels proceed directly to premium berths equipped with enclosed transfer tubes that allow passengers to move into station facilities without exposure to void conditions. These docking ports include reception areas decorated with devotional artwork and staffed by clergy who greet arriving nobles with appropriate ceremony. Chartered pilgrim vessels wait in queues that can stretch for days, their passengers remaining confined, while station administrators process documentation and calculate docking fees. The most desperate pilgrims, those traveling aboard pilgrim hulks, face the longest delays as station personnel determine how to process thousands or millions of arrivals without overwhelming surface facilities. Faith verification procedures begin once pilgrims enter quarantine station interiors, their thoroughness varying dramatically based on the subject's apparent social class and the current threat level maintained by ecclesiarchal authorities. Wealthy pilgrims meet with senior confessors in private chambers, their interviews conducted with courtesy that masks the serious purpose of these encounters. The confessors ask questions designed to assess doctrinal knowledge and detect heretical beliefs, their training allowing them to recognize subtle signs of corruption that untrained observers would miss. They inquire about the pilgrim's home world, their reasons for undertaking pilgrimage, and their understanding of imperial theology. The confessors watch for hesitations, inconsistencies, or responses that deviate from orthodox doctrine. Most wealthy pilgrims pass these interviews without difficulty, their education having included thorough instruction in proper imperial faith. The masses arriving aboard chartered vessels and pilgrim hulks undergo group processing that sacrifices individual attention for efficiency. Station personnel herd hundreds of pilgrims into examination halls where confessors address them collectively, leading recitations of standard prayers and observing the crowd for individuals who fail to participate properly. Those who stumble over familiar liturgies or show reluctance to engage in group worship receive marks on their documentation, flagging them for additional scrutiny. The confessors separate flagged individuals from the main groups, conducting brief individual interviews to determine whether their failures stem from ignorance, illness, or potentially heretical beliefs. Most receive warnings and instructions to attend remedial religious education once they reach the surface. A small percentage face detention and intensive interrogation by specialists trained in counter-heresy work. Medical screening operates in parallel with faith verification, its procedures designed to prevent disease outbreaks that could devastate populations concentrated in shrine cities. The Adeptus Mechanicus provides medical servitors programmed to detect common ailments, their sensors scanning pilgrims for elevated temperatures, unusual skin conditions, or respiratory symptoms indicating contagious illness. These servitors operate with mechanical efficiency, processing dozens of subjects per minute through examination lines that never pause. Pilgrims flagged by servitor screening proceed to secondary examination by human medicae or sisters hospitaller, who conduct more detailed assessments to determine the nature and severity of detected conditions. Those diagnosed with serious contagious diseases face quarantine in station medical wards, their pilgrimage delayed indefinitely while they receive treatment, or, in cases involving incurable conditions, compassionate end-of-life care that prevents them from spreading infection. The segregation of pilgrims by wealth begins during orbital processing and intensifies throughout their journey to sacred sites. Station administrators assign color-coded documentation that immediately identifies an individual's economic status and determines which facilities they can access. Wealthy pilgrims receive golden certificates embossed with elaborate seals, their documentation granting access to premium services and expedited processing at every stage. Middle-tier pilgrims carry silver certificates with simpler designs, marking them as worthy of basic respect but not entitled to special treatment. The poorest pilgrims receive plain parchment documents stamped with basic authentication marks, their papers identifying them as charity cases who will rely on ecclesiarchal mercy for survival. Descent to planetary surfaces occurs through dedicated pilgrim shuttles that make continuous runs between orbital stations and surface spaceports. The quality of these vessels varies as dramatically as the ships that brought pilgrims across interstellar space. Premium shuttles serving wealthy passengers feature comfortable seating, climate control systems that maintain pleasant temperatures, and viewports allowing passengers to observe their approach to holy ground. Standard shuttles pack passengers into cargo compartments with minimal life support, their interiors lit by dim luminators and ventilated by fans that barely circulate stale air. The worst shuttles, those carrying the masses from pilgrim hulks, operate at capacities that exceed any reasonable safety standard. Passengers stand pressed together so tightly that movement becomes impossible, their bodies supporting each other through the descent. The shuttles reek of fear, sweat, and vomit from passengers experiencing their first atmospheric entry, many having never left their home worlds before beginning their pilgrimage. The surface spaceports that receive pilgrim shuttles sprawl across territories that dwarf the landing facilities of most Imperial worlds. Ferrocrete landing pads extend to the horizon, their surfaces marked with guidance lights and blessed with regular prayers by tech priests who maintain the facility's machine spirits. The pads receive shuttles in continuous streams, with vessels touching down, disgorging passengers, and lifting off again within minutes. Ground crews work with practiced efficiency, directing pilgrims away from landing zones toward processing facilities, while cleaning crews prepare pads for the next arrivals. The noise level makes conversation impossible without shouting, as shuttle engines roar, voxcasters broadcast instructions, and millions of pilgrims shuffle across Ferrocrete while dragging their meager possessions. The first steps onto Shrine World soil represent profound moments for pilgrims who have sacrificed everything to reach this destination. Many kneel immediately upon leaving their shuttles, pressing their foreheads to Ferrocrete while reciting prayers of gratitude. Others weep openly, overcome by emotions they cannot articulate. The reality of arrival hits differently than the anticipation that sustained them through months or years of travel. The sacred ground they imagined during their journey proves to be Ferrocrete stained with fuel residue and marked with the passage of billions of previous pilgrims. The holy atmosphere they expected feels like any other planetary air, carrying smells of industrial activity and human habitation rather than divine perfume. Yet for most pilgrims, these mundane realities fail to diminish their sense of accomplishment. They have reached a shrine world, walked on ground sanctified by the presence of saints or the emperor's own works, and this achievement validates the hardships they endured. The pilgrim trails that wind through shrine cities follow routes established over centuries, their paths marked by devotional inscriptions and maintained by armies of shrine keepers. The major processional boulevards accommodate millions moving simultaneously toward primary shrines, but numerous smaller trails branch off these main routes, leading to secondary sites and creating networks that allow pilgrims to visit multiple locations during their stay. The Ecclesiarchy publishes official pilgrimage guides that describe recommended routes, estimate journey times, and list significant sites along each path. These guides exist in versions tailored to different social classes, with premium editions including detailed theological commentary and historical information, while basic versions provide minimal practical information suitable for illiterate pilgrims who rely on verbal instruction from clergy. Stations of suffering punctuate the pilgrim trails at regular intervals, their placement calculated to create rhythms of devotion that structure the journey toward major shrines. These stations vary in design, but share common elements including raised platforms where pilgrims perform prescribed acts of penance, devotional artwork depicting scenes from sacred history, and collection boxes for offerings. A typical station might require pilgrims to kneel and recite specific prayers 100 times, their compliance monitored by shrine keepers who maintain counts and ensure proper form. Other stations demand physical mortifications like self-flagellation with provided whips, brief periods of exposure to extreme heat or cold in specially constructed chambers, or carrying heavy stones for prescribed distances. The theology underlying these practices holds that suffering purifies the soul and demonstrates genuine commitment to faith, transforming the pilgrimage from mere tourism into legitimate spiritual exercise. The crowds moving along pilgrim trails create human rivers that flow continuously during daylight hours and diminish, but never entirely stop after dark. The density varies based on proximity to major shrines, with routes approaching the most sacred sites becoming so congested that forward progress slows to shuffling steps. Pilgrims spend hours or days traversing distances they could walk in minutes if the paths were clear, their patience tested by the press of bodies and the constant noise of prayers, conversations, and Voxcaster broadcasts. The Ecclesiarchy stations armed guards at intervals along major routes, their presence intended to maintain order and prevent the stampedes that occasionally kill hundreds when crowds panic. These guards carry shock mauls and wear armor marked with ecclesiastical symbols, their authority derived from the ministorum rather than secular law enforcement. The accommodation systems serving pilgrims reflect the Imperium's brutal hierarchies while incorporating elements of religious charity that distinguish shrine worlds from purely commercial environments. The Orders Hospitaller operate charity hospices throughout shrine cities, their facilities providing free basic accommodation to pilgrims who possess no resources. These hospices occupy large buildings near major shrines, their interiors divided into dormitory halls containing hundreds of simple cots. The Sisters Hospitaller who staff these facilities combine medical care with spiritual guidance, treating sick pilgrims while conducting prayer services and offering counsel to those struggling with the hardships of their journey. The hospices maintain strict rules governing resident behavior, prohibiting violence, theft, and heretical speech while mandating participation in daily prayers. Pilgrims who violate these rules face expulsion, a punishment that can prove fatal for those with no alternative shelter. The hospice populations consist largely of the elderly and infirm, pilgrims whose physical conditions prevent them from maintaining the pace required for street survival. Many arrived on shrine worlds already sick, their illnesses contracted during transit or pre-existing conditions they hoped holy sites might cure. Others developed ailments after arrival, their bodies unable to handle the stress of constant movement, inadequate nutrition, and exposure to diseases circulating through crowded populations. The Sisters Hospitaller provide palliative care to those beyond healing, easing their final days with pain management and spiritual comfort. Deaths in hospices occur daily, with bodies collected by corpse handlers and processed through the same systems that handle all deceased pilgrims. The Ecclesiarchy maintains that dying on a shrine world while engaged in pilgrimage guarantees favorable treatment in the afterlife, a doctrine that provides comfort to the dying and their families. Licensed hostel keepers operate commercial accommodations ranging from establishments that provide genuine value to pilgrims to operations that exploit desperate travelers through predatory practices. The Ecclesiarchy licenses these businesses, collecting fees that fund ministorum operations while theoretically ensuring minimum standards of service. In practice, enforcement varies wildly based on the connections and bribery capacity of individual hostel keepers. The better establishments offer clean sleeping spaces, regular meals, and secure storage for pilgrims' possessions, their prices set at levels that middle-tier pilgrims can afford through careful budgeting. These hostels maintain reputations that generate repeat business from pilgrims, making multiple visits or recommendations passed between travelers from the same home worlds. The worst hostel keepers operate facilities that barely deserve the name, charging exorbitant prices for spaces in crowded rooms where theft runs rampant and violence occurs regularly. These operations target the most vulnerable pilgrims, those who arrive with minimal resources and no knowledge of local conditions. The keepers employ touts who meet incoming shuttles, offering assistance and guidance while steering confused pilgrims toward hostels that pay commissions for delivered customers. Once inside, pilgrims discover that advertised amenities do not exist, that additional fees apply to services described as included, and that complaining to management accomplishes nothing. The Ecclesiarchy receives regular reports about these abusive practices, but takes action only when situations become so egregious that they threaten public order or generate complaints from influential visitors. The masses who cannot afford even the cheapest hostels sleep in cathedral atriums, public plazas, and any sheltered space where authorities permit temporary occupation. The largest cathedrals on major shrine worlds can house tens of thousands of sleeping pilgrims in their entrance halls and surrounding courtyards, their populations swelling each evening as exhausted travelers seek any available floor space. The Ecclesiarchy tolerates this practice as an extension of religious charity, viewing the provision of shelter as consistent with the Ministerum's spiritual mission. Shrine keepers patrol these sleeping areas during night hours, maintaining minimal order and removing corpses of those who died during sleep. The pilgrims sleeping in cathedrals face constant risk of theft, assault, and disease transmission, but they accept these dangers as preferable to exposure on streets where conditions prove even worse. The culmination of pilgrimage occurs at the primary shrines that drew pilgrims across the galaxy, their arrival at these sacred sites representing the fulfillment of vows and the validation of sacrifices. The approach to major shrines involves navigating security checkpoints where ecclesiarchal guards verify documentation and assess whether pilgrims meet requirements for entry. The guards examine certificates issued during orbital processing, looking for authentication marks and checking names against lists of individuals flagged for additional scrutiny. They search pilgrims for weapons, contraband, or items that might defile sacred spaces, their inspections thorough enough to detect concealed objects while processing subjects quickly enough to prevent impossible backlogs. The interior spaces of primary shrines overwhelm pilgrims with their scale and grandeur, their architecture designed to inspire awe while accommodating enormous crowds. The central worship halls rise hundreds of meters, their ceilings decorated with frescoes depicting sacred histories and supported by columns carved with devotional inscriptions. Stained glass windows filter sunlight into colored beams that illuminate altars where relics rest in sealed reliquaries. The air carries scents of incense, burning candles, and the accumulated odors of billions of previous visitors. Pilgrims shuffle forward in lines that wind through the space, their progress controlled by shrine keepers who ensure orderly movement while preventing anyone from lingering too long near the most sacred objects. The viewing of holy relics occurs from prescribed distances that prevent pilgrims from touching objects whose sanctity might be compromised by physical contact. The reliquaries containing saints' remains sit on raised platforms surrounded by barriers that keep viewers several meters away, their contents visible through armored glass or crystal panels. Pilgrims press against the barriers, straining for the best possible views while reciting prayers and weeping with emotion. Many experience profound psychological effects during these encounters, reporting visions, feelings of divine presence, or sudden certainty about previously troubling questions. The Ecclesiarchy interprets these experiences as genuine spiritual phenomena, evidence that proximity to holy remains allows the faithful to perceive truths normally hidden from mortal awareness. The purchase of relics and indulgences occurs in dedicated commercial areas adjacent to primary shrines, their operations generating enormous revenues for the Ministerum, while providing pilgrims with tangible evidence of their completed journeys. Licensed vendors sell items supposedly containing fragments of holy remains, soil from martyrdom sites, or materials that contacted sacred objects. The authentication of these items involves complex systems of certification, with different grades of blessing corresponding to different price points and levels of claimed authenticity. A simple prayer bead blessed in a mass ceremony costs a few thrones, affordable even for poor pilgrims who wish to carry something home. Elaborate reliquaries containing fragments supposedly taken directly from saints' bodies sell for prices that only wealthy nobles can afford, their purchases recorded in ecclesiarchal registries that track the distribution of significant relics. The granting of absolution represents the spiritual climax of pilgrimage, the moment when clergy formally acknowledge that pilgrims have fulfilled their vows and earned remission of sins. The ceremonies occur in confession chambers attached to major shrines, their interiors designed to create appropriate atmosphere for these significant encounters. Pilgrims kneel before priests who sit behind screened partitions, their faces hidden to maintain focus on the spiritual rather than personal dimensions of confession. The priests listen as pilgrims describe their journeys, the hardships they endured, and the sins they committed before departing their home worlds. The confessors assign final penances scaled to the severity of disclosed sins, typically prayers or modest donations, rather than physical mortifications, given that pilgrims have already demonstrated devotion through completing their journeys. The documentation of absolution provides pilgrims with certificates they can present to clergy on their home worlds, proof that they completed legitimate pilgrimages and received official recognition from shrine world authorities. These documents carry significant social value in communities where pilgrimage represents major life achievements, their possession elevating individual status and demonstrating their commitment to faith. Some pilgrims frame their absolution certificates, displaying them prominently in their homes as evidence of their devotion. Others carry the documents constantly, presenting them during confession on their home worlds to establish their spiritual credentials. The choice to remain permanently on shrine worlds attracts pilgrims whose experiences during their journeys convince them that they cannot return to their previous lives. These individuals petition local clergy for permission to stay, offering their labor in exchange for basic sustenance and the opportunity to live near sacred sites. The Ecclesiarchy accepts many of these petitions, recognizing that permanent populations require constant replenishment given the harsh conditions that generate steady mortality. The new shrine servitors receive assignments based on their capabilities and the current needs of local facilities. Those with useful skills become craftsmen producing devotional items, scribes copying religious texts, or workers maintaining infrastructure. The unskilled join the armies of menial laborers who clean shrines, carry supplies, and perform the countless unglamorous tasks required to keep shrine cities functional. These permanent residents typically live in conditions barely better than those they experienced as pilgrims, their existence defined by constant labor and devotion, but they accept these hardships as worthwhile prices for remaining near holy ground until death claims them. The classification system governing holy relics within the Imperium represents one of the Ecclesiarchy's most complex bureaucratic structures, maintained by the reliquaria divisions that operate across thousands of worlds. These specialized departments employ ordained clergy trained in authentication techniques, historical research, and the theological principles that determine an object's sacred status. The hierarchy begins with primary relics, items that possess direct physical contact with the emperor himself or canonized saints. A fragment of bone from Saint Celestine's original mortal remains, a piece of armor the emperor wore during the Unification Wars, or a weapon wielded by Sebastian Thor during the Age of Apostasy all qualify as primary relics. The Ministorum maintains exhaustive documentation for each authenticated primary relic, recording its provenance, chain of custody, and the specific miracles or historical significance that justify its classification. Secondary relics occupy the next tier, consisting of objects that contacted primary relics or were present during significant sacred events without direct involvement of saints or the emperor. The clothing worn by witnesses to Saint Celestine's manifestations, soil from battlefields where she fought, or water drawn from fonts she blessed during her appearances all fall into this category. The authentication process for secondary relics requires establishing clear connections to verified primary sources, a task complicated by the vast spans of time separating current investigations from the original events. The reliquaria divisions employ historians who specialize in analyzing ancient records, comparing accounts from multiple sources, and applying rigorous standards of evidence that would satisfy even the most skeptical imperial administrators. Despite these precautions, the classification of secondary relics generates regular controversies within the Ministorum, with different factions disputing the authenticity of specific items or the validity of connections claimed between objects and primary sources. Tertiary relics represent the lowest tier of officially recognized sacred objects, encompassing items that contacted secondary relics or were blessed by ordained clergy during significant ceremonies. Prayer beads that touched a secondary relic, water bottles filled at shrines housing primary relics, or pieces of cloth that wrapped authenticated bones all qualify for tertiary classification. The Ecclesiarchy produces tertiary relics in enormous quantities, recognizing that demand for sacred objects far exceeds any possible supply of primary or secondary items. The production occurs under controlled conditions in workshops operated by licensed artisans who work under clerical supervision. These facilities combine manufacturing efficiency with religious ritual, their workers reciting prayers while assembling items and submitting finished products for blessing by ordained priests. The resulting objects carry official authentication marks, typically wax seals impressed with ecclesiastical symbols or certificates signed by local confessors that supposedly guarantee their legitimate status as tertiary relics. The industry surrounding relic production operates on scales that rival major imperial manufacturing sectors, employing millions of workers across shrine worlds and generating revenues that fund significant portions of Ministorum operations. The legitimate trade begins with the ossuaries that house saints' remains, facilities designed to allow controlled extraction of bone fragments while preserving the integrity of primary relics. The tech priests who maintain these ossuaries employ specialized equipment that can remove microscopic bone samples without damaging visible portions of preserved remains. These samples undergo processing that transforms them into quantities sufficient for distribution, with techniques involving careful grinding and mixing with blessed materials that extend limited supplies. A single finger bone from a canonized saint might yield thousands of fragment relics through this process, each containing trace amounts of authentic material combined with blessed substrate. The distribution networks moving relics from production facilities to markets span the Imperium, their logistics managed by merchant guilds operating under ecclesiarchal licenses. These organizations maintain warehouses, transport fleets, and retail operations that deliver sacred objects to countless worlds. The merchants pay substantial fees to the Ministorum for their licenses, accepting oversight by church officials who monitor their operations and ensure compliance with regulations governing relic trade. The profit margins remain enormous despite these costs, as demand for relics never diminishes regardless of economic conditions. Even during wars, famines, or other catastrophes that devastate normal commerce, pilgrims and faithful citizens continue purchasing sacred objects, viewing them as essential rather than discretionary expenses. The black market in fraudulent relics operates parallel to legitimate trade, its practitioners exploiting the same demand while avoiding the costs and restrictions of official licensing. These operations range from small-time criminals selling obvious fakes to sophisticated organizations that produce counterfeits difficult to distinguish from authentic items. The simplest frauds involve common objects presented as relics without any authentication, their sellers relying on buyers' desperation or ignorance to complete transactions. A piece of ordinary bone might be sold as a saint's fragment, water from municipal supplies passed off as drawn from holy fonts, or mass-produced prayer beads claimed to have touched sacred relics. These crude forgeries fool only the most naive purchasers, but the constant influx of new pilgrims unfamiliar with authentication procedures ensures steady markets for even obvious fakes. More sophisticated counterfeiters invest considerable resources in producing forgeries that can pass initial inspection by buyers with some knowledge of authentication procedures. These operations employ skilled artisans who study legitimate relics and reproduce their physical characteristics, including appropriate aging, wear patterns consistent with claimed histories, and authentication marks copied from genuine items. The counterfeiters purchase or steal wax seals used by legitimate workshops, forge signatures of deceased clergy whose records are difficult to verify, or bribe corrupt officials to provide authentic documentation for fraudulent objects. The resulting forgeries enter distribution networks where they mix with legitimate relics, their false nature remaining undetected unless subjected to intensive examination by reliquaria specialists. The Ecclesiarchy wages constant campaigns against relic fraud, recognizing that widespread counterfeiting undermines faith in the authentication systems that legitimize the entire sacred objects trade. The Ministorum employs investigators who infiltrate suspected forgery operations, purchase samples from questionable vendors, and analyze seized items for evidence of fraud. These investigations operate under authority granted by cardinals governing shrine worlds, their agents empowered to conduct searches, make arrests, and confiscate suspected counterfeits. Convicted forgers face severe punishments, including public execution, their deaths serving as warnings to others who might consider entering the fraudulent relic trade. The Ecclesiarchy publicizes these executions extensively, ensuring that communities across shrine worlds witness the consequences of crimes against faith. Despite aggressive enforcement efforts, the black market persists and arguably thrives, driven by economic incentives that overwhelm deterrent effects of punishment. The potential profits from successful forgery operations exceed those available through almost any legitimate enterprise accessible to lower-class Imperial citizens. A skilled counterfeiter operating for a few years before detection can accumulate wealth sufficient to purchase passage off-world, establish new identities, and live comfortably for decades. The risk of execution, if caught, represents acceptable odds for desperate individuals with few alternative paths to prosperity. Additionally, the sheer scale of relic commerce makes comprehensive enforcement impossible. The Ministorum's investigators can inspect only tiny fractions of items sold annually, meaning that most fraudulent relics never face scrutiny that might expose their false nature. The role of shrine worlds as repositories for the Imperium's most sacred artifacts extends beyond their function as pilgrimage destinations, transforming these planets into secure storage facilities for items too valuable or dangerous to remain elsewhere. The vault temples that house these collections combine religious architecture with fortress design, their structures built to withstand sieges while providing appropriate settings for sacred objects. The largest vault temples occupy positions within shrine city cores, their walls constructed from blessed ceramite reinforced with adamantium and protected by void shields capable of deflecting orbital bombardment. The interiors contain climate-controlled chambers where temperature and humidity remain constant regardless of external conditions, preserving fragile artifacts from environmental damage. Tech priests maintain the environmental systems under contracts with the Ecclesiarchy, their work combining technical expertise with religious devotion as they view the preservation of sacred objects as service to both the machine god and the emperor. The security measures protecting vault temples operate through multiple redundant systems that blend conventional technology with faith-based protections. The Ministorum claims provide supernatural defense against intruders. Physical barriers include massive doors forged from blessed metals, their surfaces inscribed with prayers, and sealed with mechanisms requiring multiple keys held by different custodians. The approach corridors contain murder holes through which defenders can fire on attackers, blessed oils that can be ignited to create walls of flame, and collapse points where ceilings can be brought down to seal passages. Surveillance systems monitor all areas through picked capture devices linked to security stations staffed continuously by armed guards. The Adepta Sororitas provides the primary military presence, with squads of battle sisters maintaining permanent garrison duty at major vault temples. These warriors undergo specialized training in artifact protection, learning techniques for defending sacred spaces while minimizing risk to the objects they guard. The faith-based security measures include wards blessed by senior clergy, supposedly creating spiritual barriers that repel those with corrupt intentions. The Ecclesiarchy maintains that these protections function through the emperor's power, manifesting as psychological pressure that grows stronger as unauthorized individuals approach sacred spaces. Intruders report experiencing mounting dread, physical discomfort, and overwhelming convictions that they should abandon their attempts. Whether these effects result from genuine divine intervention, psychic phenomena generated by concentrated belief, or simply psychological responses to impressive religious theater remains debated among those imperial institutions with sufficient independence to question ministorum claims. Regardless of their actual mechanism, the wards appear to provide real deterrent value, as attempted thefts from well-protected vault temples occur far less frequently than their contents' value might otherwise encourage. The collections housed within vault temples include artifacts spanning the entire history of the Imperium and even pre-Unity Terra. Weapons supposedly wielded by the Emperor during the Unification Wars rest in sealed cases, their designs predating standard Imperial patterns and incorporating technologies that tech priests struggle to analyze. Fragments of the Imperial Palace's original construction, removed during renovations, and preserved as connections to Terra's sacred spaces, occupy positions of honor in specially designed reliquaries. Personal effects of Primarchs who remained loyal to the Emperor receive careful preservation, though the Ecclesiarchy maintains strict controls over access to these items given their connections to figures whose semi-divine status generates theological complications. The vault temples also contain extensive collections of documents, including original copies of the Lectitio Divinitatis, correspondence between early Imperial saints, and records of the first missions that spread the Imperial cult across newly compliant worlds during the Great Crusade. The political significance of relics extends far beyond their obvious religious value, as these objects serve as tools for projecting power, cementing alliances, and demonstrating the Ecclesiarchy's authority across the Imperium. Cardinals governing shrine worlds loan relics to other institutions, creating obligations and establishing relationships that translate into political influence. A battle sister order preparing for a crucial campaign might receive temporary custody of a weapon fragment supposedly touched by the Emperor, the loan demonstrating ministorum support while binding the order to reciprocal obligations. Planetary governors seeking to strengthen their world's faith might petition for relics to display in local cathedrals, their requests granted or denied based on political calculations about the supplicant's loyalty and usefulness to ecclesiarchal interests. The circulation of important relics creates networks of obligation and alliance that reinforce the ministorum's position within the broader imperial power structure. The military applications of relics manifest most directly through their deployment alongside imperial forces during campaigns, where their presence supposedly provides tangible benefits beyond simple morale effects. The Ecclesiarchy maintains that proximity to sacred objects strengthens soldiers' resistance to chaos corruption, shields them from hostile psychic attacks, and increases their courage in combat. Imperial Guard regiments with chaplains carrying authenticated relics report lower rates of desertion, fewer instances of panic under fire, and greater willingness to accept suicidal orders when commanders invoke the sacred object's protection. Whether these effects result from genuine supernatural intervention or simply psychological responses to religious symbolism remains impossible to determine definitively, but military commanders value relics regardless of the mechanism behind their apparent efficacy. Requests for relic deployment during major campaigns flow constantly to Shrine World authorities, their volume far exceeding available supply and forcing cardinals to make difficult decisions about which operations warrant sacred support. The theft of major relics generates conflicts that can escalate into military confrontations involving multiple imperial institutions. When sacred objects disappear from vault temples or are seized during raids on shrine worlds, the Ecclesiarchy demands their recovery with intensity that brooks no compromise. cardinals mobilize every resource at their disposal, calling on obligations from allied institutions and threatening political retaliation against any organization that fails to assist. The Inquisition typically becomes involved in major relic theft cases, recognizing that such crimes often indicate broader conspiracies or heretical movements that threaten imperial stability. Inquisitors assigned to these investigations receive broad authority to commandeer resources, interrogate suspects, and pursue leads across multiple worlds. Their methods combine conventional detective work with more exotic techniques, including psychic interrogation, analysis of warp traces left by stolen objects, and consultation with specialists in artifact authentication. The recovery operations following major thefts can consume years and involve forces ranging from small teams of specialists to entire battle groups depending on circumstances. When investigations identify thieves' locations, the response typically involves overwhelming force intended to ensure artifact recovery while demonstrating the consequences of crimes against the Ecclesiarchy. The Adeptus Sororitas provides assault forces for operations on Imperial worlds, their battle sisters conducting raids with precision that minimizes collateral damage while maximizing chances of recovering stolen items intact. Operations in more hostile environments might require Space Marine intervention, with chapters that maintain close relationships with the Ministorum dispatching forces to retrieve sacred objects from Xenos-held territories or Chaos-corrupted worlds. These recovery missions carry risks beyond normal combat operations, as relics might have been corrupted during their time in enemy hands or booby, trapped by thieves attempting to destroy evidence. The Inquisition's interest in relics extends beyond simple theft investigations to encompass concerns about potential Xenos or Chaos taint affecting sacred objects. Inquisitors recognize that items venerated by billions of faithful represent valuable targets for enemies seeking to corrupt the Imperium from within. A relic secretly tainted by Chaos influence might spread corruption to those who venerate it, their faith twisted into channels that serve the ruinous powers rather than the Emperor. Xenos artifacts disguised as Imperial relics could introduce alien influences into human populations, subtly altering behavior patterns or creating psychological vulnerabilities that enemies might later exploit. The Ordo Hereticus maintains specialized departments focused on examining sacred objects for signs of corruption, their investigators combining theological knowledge with expertise in detecting supernatural taint. The examination procedures for suspected tainted relics involve multiple stages of analysis conducted under strict security protocols. Initial inspections occur in isolated facilities where contamination can be contained if objects prove corrupted, their locations typically on uninhabited moons or remote orbital stations. Tech priests analyze physical properties using auger arrays calibrated to detect anomalous energy signatures, unusual molecular structures, or other indicators of Xenos or warp-based alteration. Sanctioned psychers probe objects psychically, searching for demonic presences or psychic imprints that might indicate Chaos influence. The Ecclesiarchy provides theological experts who compare objects against documented descriptions of authentic relics, looking for discrepancies that might indicate substitution or alteration. These examinations can take months or years to complete, during which the suspected relics remain in secure containment while analysts debate their findings and prepare recommendations for final disposition. Objects confirmed as tainted face destruction through methods designed to ensure complete elimination of corrupting influences. The Inquisition maintains specialized facilities for this purpose, their furnaces blessed by senior clergy and operated by tech priests trained in proper destruction protocols. The burning occurs during elaborate ceremonies attended by inquisitors, ecclesiarchal representatives, and members of the Adeptus Sororitas who witness the destruction and verify its completion. The ashes undergo additional purification through exposure to blessed oils and prayers before final disposal, typically involving scattering in stellar coronas or burial in consecrated ground on uninhabited worlds. The Inquisition documents these destructions exhaustively, creating records that prevent future attempts to pass off forgeries as the destroyed originals while providing evidence that proper protocols were followed. The authentication challenges facing the Reliquaria divisions intensify as the Imperium ages, and the distances between current times and the events that generated sacred objects continue growing. Items supposedly dating to the Great Crusade or earlier require verification across spans of 10,000 years or more, periods during which records may have been lost, corrupted, or deliberately falsified. The investigators must piece together provenance chains from fragmentary evidence, comparing accounts from multiple sources, while accounting for the possibility that any individual source might contain errors or fabrications. The work demands extraordinary patience and expertise, as analysts spend decades researching single objects, while knowing that definitive proof of authenticity may prove impossible to obtain. Despite these challenges, the Reliquaria divisions continue their work with dedication born from recognition that the integrity of the Imperium's sacred object trade depends on maintaining rigorous authentication standards, even when those standards make their work nearly impossible. The underhives beneath shrine cities breed criminal enterprises that flourish in spaces where ecclesiarchal authority grows thin and desperation concentrates populations willing to risk damnation for survival. These subterranean warrens extend kilometers below the processional boulevards and cathedral spires, their tunnels and chambers originally serving as maintenance passages, storage vaults, or foundations for structures built millennia ago. Over centuries, populations of outcasts, fugitives, and those too poor to afford surface accommodation have colonized these spaces, creating shadow societies that operate according to rules fundamentally different from those governing the faithful masses above. The architecture reflects this abandonment, with crumbling ferrocrete walls covered in gang markings, flickering luminators powered by jury-rigged connections to surface power grids, and air thick with moisture condensed from leaking pipes and the breath of thousands living in confined spaces. The criminal hierarchies controlling underhive territories organize themselves around the specific opportunities that shrine world environments provide. Relic forgers occupy positions of particular importance, their workshops producing counterfeits that feed into black markets, serving pilgrims desperate for sacred objects, but lacking funds to purchase legitimate items. These operations require skilled artisans capable of reproducing authentication marks, aging materials to suggest appropriate antiquity, and understanding theological details well enough to create plausible backstories for their products. The forgers work in hidden chambers where they maintain collections of reference materials, including captured examples of genuine relics, stolen authentication seals, and detailed notes on the techniques employed by legitimate relic producers. The most successful forgery operations employ former ecclesiarchal workers who possess insider knowledge of authentication procedures and access to materials difficult for ordinary criminals to obtain. The distribution networks moving forged relics from underhive workshops to surface markets operate through chains of intermediaries designed to insulate producers from direct exposure to law enforcement. Street-level vendors purchase inventory from middlemen who maintain no direct contact with the forgers themselves, creating barriers that investigations struggle to penetrate. These vendors set up temporary stalls in pilgrim districts, selling their wares alongside legitimate merchants until Ministorum investigators or Sororitas patrols force them to relocate. The constant movement makes sustained surveillance difficult, as vendors who attract official attention simply disappear into the crowds and establish new operations elsewhere. The profits from successful forgery rings exceed those available through almost any other criminal enterprise accessible to underhive populations, creating intense competition between rival organizations and generating violence that occasionally spills onto surface levels where it threatens pilgrims and residents. False prophets represent another category of criminal exploitation unique to shrine world environments, individuals who claim divine inspiration or special connections to the emperor while using these assertions to extract money, labor, or sexual favors from vulnerable pilgrims. These charlatans establish themselves in areas where official ecclesiarchal presence remains limited, typically in overcrowded pilgrim districts or underhive settlements where desperate people seek any source of hope or guidance. The false prophets deliver sermons that blend orthodox imperial doctrine with personal revelations supposedly received through visions or direct communication with the emperor. They promise healing to the sick, absolution to the guilty, and favorable judgment in the afterlife to those who provide appropriate donations or services. The most successful false prophets develop genuine followings, their charisma and psychological manipulation skills allowing them to maintain influence over dozens or hundreds of believers who defend their prophet against skeptics and provide the resources necessary to sustain the operation. The Ecclesiarchy views false prophets as particularly dangerous criminals because their activities directly challenge ministorum authority over religious matters, while potentially spreading doctrinal corruption that might metastasize into genuine heresy. Confessors assigned to counter heresy duties prioritize investigations of reported false prophets, recognizing that movements beginning as simple fraud can evolve into heretical cults if left unchecked. The investigators infiltrate suspected prophet operations, posing as believers while documenting claims and identifying followers who might face charges as accomplices. The evidence gathering proceeds carefully, as premature action might allow the prophet to escape while alerting other criminals to ecclesiarchal interest. Once sufficient evidence accumulates, the ministorum coordinates with sororitas forces to conduct simultaneous raids that capture the prophet and key lieutenants, while scattering followers before they can organize resistance. The trials of captured false prophets serve dual purposes, punishing the criminals while demonstrating ecclesiarchal authority to populations that might otherwise question ministorum effectiveness. The proceedings occur in public spaces where crowds can witness the interrogation of accused individuals and hear evidence presented against them. Confessors conducting the trials ask questions designed to expose the prophet's ignorance of genuine theology, their inability to perform miracles when challenged, and the mercenary motivations underlying their religious claims. The convicted prophets face execution by burning, their deaths carried out in the same public spaces where their trials occurred. The Ecclesiarchy requires attendance at these executions by individuals identified as the prophet's followers, forcing them to witness the consequences of following false teachers while providing opportunities to recant their associations and receive absolution. Thieves specializing in preying on pilgrims operate throughout shrine cities, their techniques ranging from crude pickpocketing to elaborate confidence schemes that strip victims of everything they possess. The simplest operations involve gangs of children who move through crowded processional boulevards, their small size and agility allowing them to slip through packed crowds while cutting purse strings or extracting valuables from pockets and bags. These young thieves work for adult handlers who provide minimal food and shelter in exchange for stolen goods, their operations generating steady income while exploiting populations of orphans and abandoned children that accumulate in any city housing millions. The Ecclesiarchy maintains orphanages intended to provide for these children, but demand far exceeds capacity, and many youngsters slip through gaps in the system, falling into criminal enterprises that offer survival at the cost of damnation. More sophisticated theft operations target wealthy pilgrims through schemes that exploit their unfamiliarity with local conditions and their emotional vulnerability following intense religious experiences. The criminals pose as helpful guides, offering to lead pilgrims to lesser-known shrines or provide access to restricted areas in exchange for fees. Once victims hand over payment and follow their supposed guides into isolated areas, accomplices emerge to rob them of remaining valuables before abandoning them in unfamiliar districts. Other schemes involve fake hostels that advertise premium accommodations, collect payment from pilgrims seeking quality lodging, then disappear overnight with the money, while leaving victims in buildings that might not even belong to the criminals. The ministorum receives constant complaints about these operations, but struggles to prevent them given the vast numbers of pilgrims arriving daily and the criminals' ability to adapt their techniques faster than authorities can develop countermeasures. Unsanctioned cult activity represents the most serious criminal threat festering in underhive environments, as these organizations can evolve from simple criminal enterprises into genuine heretical movements that worship chaos powers or Xenos entities. The cults typically begin when charismatic individuals gather followers around heterodox interpretations of Imperial doctrine, their teachings diverging from ministorum orthodoxy in ways that initially seem minor but create foundations for deeper corruption. A cult might emphasize particular aspects of the emperor's nature while downplaying others, or introduce practices borrowed from pre-imperial religions that survived in isolated populations. These deviations attract individuals dissatisfied with orthodox worship, people seeking more personal connections to the divine or explanations for suffering that standard imperial theology addresses inadequately. The transition from heterodox cult to genuinely heretical organization occurs through exposure to corrupting influences that exploit the theological vulnerabilities created by doctrinal deviation. Chaos entities recognize these cults as potential servants, their agents infiltrating gatherings and gradually introducing concepts that prepare members for full corruption. The process operates subtly, with new ideas presented as natural extensions of existing beliefs rather than radical departures from imperial faith. A cult emphasizing the emperor's warrior aspects might gradually adopt increasingly violent practices, their rituals incorporating bloodshed that eventually attracts the attention of Khorne. Organizations focused on knowledge and enlightenment prove vulnerable to Tzeentch's influence, their members' curiosity about forbidden lore creating openings for demonic corruption. The cults rarely recognize their own corruption until transformation reaches advanced stages, their members convinced they serve the emperor even as they perform rituals that feed chaos powers. The mechanisms for detecting heretical activity on shrine worlds combine routine surveillance by ecclesiarchal authorities with specialized investigations conducted by the Ordo Hereticus. The Ministorum maintains networks of informants throughout shrine cities, individuals who report suspicious activities to local confessors in exchange for small payments or reductions in their own tithe obligations. These informants include merchants who observe unusual purchases of materials that might serve ritual purposes, hostel keepers who note guests engaging in secretive behaviors, and workers in underhive facilities who encounter evidence of cult gatherings. The reports flow to confessors assigned to counter heresy duties, who analyze the information for patterns suggesting organized heretical activity rather than isolated incidents of doctrinal confusion or simple criminality. The Adeptus Sororitas maintains its own intelligence networks parallel to ecclesiarchal systems, their orders dialogus specializing in information gathering and analysis related to heretical threats. The sisters employ sophisticated techniques including surveillance of suspected cultists, infiltration of organizations under investigation, and interrogation of captured individuals using methods that combine psychological pressure with limited physical coercion. The information gathered through these operations feeds into databases maintained at Sororitas commanderies, their machine spirits programmed to identify connections between apparently unrelated incidents and flag patterns, suggesting coordinated heretical activity. When evidence accumulates to levels justifying direct action, the Order's militant deploy strike forces that raid suspected cult locations with overwhelming force, their objectives including capture of cult leaders for interrogation, seizure of evidence documenting heretical practices, and elimination of corrupted individuals beyond redemption. The purging operations following discovery of significant heretical cults involve coordinated actions by multiple imperial institutions, their combined efforts necessary to ensure complete eradication of corruption. The Ecclesiarchy provides theological expertise and identifies individuals requiring investigation based on their connections to confirmed heretics. The Adeptus Sororitas supplies military forces that conduct raids, secure evidence, and transport prisoners to interrogation facilities. The Adeptus Arbites contributes legal authority and additional manpower for large-scale operations requiring simultaneous actions across multiple locations. In cases involving suspected chaos corruption, the Inquisition assumes overall command, its agents coordinating the efforts of other organizations while conducting their own investigations into the cult's origins and potential connections to broader heretical movements. The interrogations of captured cultists proceed according to protocols designed to extract maximum information while determining which prisoners might be saved through penance and which require execution. The interrogators, typically experienced confessors or inquisitorial agents trained in these techniques, begin with relatively mild questioning that establishes baseline responses and identifies obvious lies. As interrogations progress, the methods intensify through carefully calibrated stages that increase psychological and physical pressure without causing damage that might render subjects unable to provide useful information. The interrogators seek specific details including the cult's size, the identities of members who remain at large, the sources of any heretical texts or artifacts the cult possessed, and evidence of contact with external corrupting influences like demons or chaos space marines. The dispositions of convicted heretics follow sentencing guidelines that consider the severity of their crimes, the depth of their corruption, and their potential value as examples to deter others from similar transgressions. Minor cultists who participated in early-stage heterodox worship without exposure to genuine chaos corruption might receive sentences of penance involving years of hard labor in ecclesiarchal facilities, their service monitored constantly for signs of backsliding into heretical beliefs. More seriously corrupted individuals face execution, their deaths carried out publicly to demonstrate the consequences of heresy, while providing opportunities for the condemned to repent in their final moments. The cult leaders and those confirmed as having direct contact with demonic entities receive the harshest sentences, their executions involving prolonged suffering, intended to serve as ultimate deterrence while supposedly providing the condemned with opportunities to atone through pain. Corruption within the Ecclesiarchy itself represents a category of crime that authorities handle with particular sensitivity, as public exposure of clerical wrongdoing threatens the ministorum's legitimacy and provides ammunition for critics who question ecclesiastical authority. The practice of simony, the buying and selling of church positions, operates as an open secret within higher levels of the ecclesiarchal hierarchy despite official prohibitions. Wealthy families purchase appointments for their children, viewing positions in the ministorum as investments that provide social status and access to church revenues. The transactions occur through intermediaries who negotiate prices and arrange transfers of funds that never appear in official records. A family seeking to secure a confessor position for their son might pay hundreds of thousands of thrones to a cardinal's agent, the money flowing into accounts controlled by senior clergy, while documentation attributes the appointment to the candidate's supposed theological qualifications and devotional record. The sale of positions extends throughout the ecclesiarchal hierarchy, from parish priest appointments on minor worlds to cardinal positions governing important shrine worlds. The prices scale with the position's prestige and revenue-generating potential, with assignments to wealthy shrine worlds commanding fees that exceed the gross planetary product of small colonies. The practice creates self-reinforcing cycles of corruption, as clergy who purchase their positions must recoup their investments through similar sales of subordinate appointments or through embezzlement of church funds. The system generates enormous wealth for those positioned to profit from it, while undermining the spiritual authority that supposedly justifies ministorum power. Reform-minded clergy who attempt to challenge simony face retaliation from entrenched interests, their careers destroyed through false accusations or assignment to positions on remote worlds where they cannot threaten profitable arrangements. The embezzlement of pilgrimage tithes represents another common form of ecclesiastical corruption, its practice facilitated by the enormous volumes of money flowing through shrine world economies and the complexity of accounting systems tracking these funds. Clergy assigned to manage pilgrimage revenues skim percentages from collections, their theft concealed through falsified records that attribute missing funds to legitimate expenses or lower than actual donation volumes. The embezzlers typically operate in collusion with lay administrators who maintain financial records, their cooperation secured through profit-sharing arrangements that give both parties incentives to maintain the fraud. The schemes can continue for years before detection, as the sheer scale of legitimate revenues makes moderate theft difficult to identify through routine audits. A confessor managing a major shrine might embezzle millions of thrones annually, while the missing funds represent small enough percentages of total collections that discrepancies appear within normal variation ranges. The exploitation of indentured shrine servitors provides corrupt clergy with sources of personal profit while inflicting suffering on populations bound to ecclesiarchal service through debt obligations or criminal sentences. These servitors work without wages, beyond minimal food and shelter, their labor supposedly dedicated to the emperor through service to his church. Corrupt overseers lease servitors to private enterprises, collecting fees that they pocket while falsifying records to show the workers remained in church facilities. Other schemes involve selling positions that allow servitors to reduce their service obligations, with desperate individuals paying bribes to supervisors who promise early release while having no authority to grant such clemency. The servitors who discover they were defrauded face impossible choices between continuing their service or attempting to escape, knowing that recapture results in extended sentences and brutal punishments. The role of the Ordo Hereticus in monitoring shrine worlds reflects the Inquisition's broader mission to safeguard imperial faith while checking the Ecclesiarchy's power. Inquisitors assigned to Shrine World oversight maintain permanent offices in major shrine cities, their facilities typically located in fortified compounds separate from ministorum buildings. These inquisitors cultivate independent intelligence networks that provide information about ecclesiarchal activities without relying on church-controlled sources. The networks include informants within the ministorum itself, individuals motivated by genuine concern about corruption or by payments from inquisitorial funds. The inquisitors also maintain relationships with the Adepta Sororitas, whose members often prove more willing to report ecclesiarchal misconduct than ordinary clergy who fear retaliation from their superiors. The investigations of ecclesiarchal excess require delicate handling, as inquisitors must gather sufficient evidence to justify action while avoiding premature confrontations that might allow targets to destroy evidence or flee. The inquisitors employ surveillance techniques, including monitoring of financial transactions, interception of communications between suspected corrupt clergy, and physical observation of targets' activities. They analyze patterns in church records, looking for discrepancies suggesting embezzlement or other financial crimes. When investigations identify specific instances of corruption, the inquisitors must decide whether to pursue immediate action or continue gathering evidence in hopes of uncovering broader networks. The decisions involve balancing the harm caused by allowing corruption to continue against the benefits of more comprehensive prosecutions that might eliminate entire corrupt factions. The tension between inquisitorial authority and ministorum sovereignty generates constant friction, as both institutions claim ultimate authority over matters touching faith and heresy. Cardinals governing shrine worlds resent inquisitorial oversight, viewing it as insulting to the ecclesiarchy's dignity and an infringement on church autonomy. They argue that the ministorum possesses sufficient internal mechanisms to address corruption, and that external interference undermines ecclesiastical authority. The Inquisition counters that the age of apostasy demonstrated the catastrophic consequences of unchecked ecclesiarchal power, and that external oversight remains necessary to prevent future abuses. The debate plays out through political maneuvering rather than open conflict, with both sides seeking support from other imperial institutions and maneuvering to limit their opponents' influence. The practical manifestations of this tension include jurisdictional disputes over specific cases, arguments about access to ecclesiarchal records, and conflicts regarding the disposition of clergy accused of crimes. An inquisitor investigating suspected heresy within a shrine world's clerical hierarchy might demand access to personnel files, financial records, and other documentation that cardinals claim falls under ecclesiastical privilege. The cardinals might refuse cooperation, arguing that church records remain confidential and that the inquisitor lacks authority to compel their disclosure. The resulting standoffs can paralyze investigations while both sides appeal to higher authorities for support. In extreme cases, the disputes escalate to involve the Senatorum Imperialis on Terra, where representatives of the Inquisition and Ecclesiarchy present arguments before the High Lords themselves. The strategic calculus surrounding shrine world defense operates according to principles that prioritize symbolic value over conventional military logic, creating situations where Imperial commanders commit disproportionate resources to holding ground that possesses minimal tactical significance. A cardinal world or major shrine world under threat receives defensive allocations that might save dozens of forge worlds or agri-worlds from conquest, the disparity justified through arguments about morale and faith that military planners trained in resource optimization find frustrating but cannot openly challenge. The Adeptus Munitorum maintains contingency plans for defending every officially designated shrine world, their strategic assessments acknowledging that losing these planets to enemy forces inflicts psychological damage across entire sectors regardless of their lack of strategic resources or manufacturing capacity. The historical record documents numerous sieges where Imperial forces accepted catastrophic casualties defending shrine worlds against enemies who recognized their symbolic importance and deliberately targeted them to demoralize human populations. During the Gothic War, Chaos fleets under Abaddon the Despoiler struck at several shrine worlds in the Segmentum Obscurus, their attacks designed to demonstrate the Imperium's inability to protect its holiest sites. The defenders of these worlds included Imperial Navy battle groups, multiple Imperial Guard regiments, and significant Adepta Sororitas forces, their combined strength representing military assets that might have prevented the fall of strategically vital systems. The Chaos forces besieging these shrine worlds suffered enormous casualties, breaking through orbital defenses and fighting through shrine cities transformed into fortresses. But they persisted because every day these battles continued drew Imperial forces away from other theaters, where their absence allowed Chaos advances elsewhere. The transformation of shrine worlds into military fortifications during wartime follows established protocols developed over millennia of conflict, their implementation overseen by ecclesiarchal authorities working alongside Imperial Guard command staff. The process begins with the conscription of able-bodied pilgrims and permanent residents into militia formations, their religious fervor compensating somewhat for lack of military training. The Fraterus militia expands dramatically during mobilization, with local priests organizing their congregations into armed bands that receive basic weapons from ecclesiarchal armories. These improvised soldiers undergo abbreviated training conducted by retired Imperial Guard veterans employed by the Ministorum or by Sororitas instructors seconded to militia preparation duties. The training emphasizes defensive operations, teaching militia members how to man fortified positions, operate crew-served weapons, and maintain discipline under fire rather than attempting to transform them into assault troops capable of complex maneuvers. The fortification of shrine cities involves converting religious architecture into defensive positions while attempting to preserve the sacred character of structures that pilgrims traveled across the galaxy to visit. The Adeptus Mechanicus provides technical expertise, their siege engineers assessing existing buildings for defensive potential and designing modifications that enhance military utility without completely destroying architectural features. The massive cathedrals that dominate shrine city skylines become strongpoints, their thick walls capable of withstanding bombardment, while their height provides observation posts and firing positions overlooking surrounding districts. Tech priests install gun emplacements in bell towers and along cathedral roofs, mount void shield generators in crypts and basements, and establish command centers in spaces previously dedicated to prayer and contemplation. The Ecclesiarchy insists that all military modifications receive proper blessing before implementation, their priests conducting ceremonies that sanctify weapons emplacements and consecrate defensive positions as extensions of holy ground rather than simple military installations. The processional boulevards that normally channel millions of pilgrims towards sacred sites become kill zones designed to funnel attacking forces into areas where defenders can concentrate fire. Engineers construct barricades across these wide avenues, their positions incorporating ferrocrete barriers reinforced with blessed ceramite and arranged to create interlocking fields of fire. The barricades feature firing ports at multiple heights, allowing defenders to engage enemies at ground level, while supporting troops on upper levels provide covering fire from elevated positions. The spaces between major barricades receive additional preparation, including the placement of mines blessed by ecclesiarchal tech priests, the installation of razor wire sanctified through prayers, and the creation of kill zones where defenders can trigger building collapses to trap advancing enemies. The Ministorum maintains that these preparations enhance rather than diminish the sacred character of processional routes, arguing that defending holy ground against the emperor's enemies represents the highest form of devotion. The strategic deployment of relics during siege operations reflects ecclesiarchal beliefs about the tangible military benefits provided by proximity to sacred objects, though skeptics within the Imperial Guard and other military institutions question whether these effects exceed simple morale improvements. The Ministorum brings relics from vault temples to forward positions, their presence supposedly strengthening defenders' courage while weakening enemies' resolve. Battle Sisters carry reliquaries into combat, the sacred objects mounted on their armor or carried by specialized bearers who accompany combat squads. The sight of these relics inspires nearby Imperial forces, their presence serving as physical reminders that they fight in the Emperor's name and under his protection. Troops defending positions near displayed relics report reduced fear, increased resistance to psychological warfare, and greater willingness to hold ground against overwhelming odds. Whether these effects result from genuine divine intervention, psychic phenomena generated by concentrated faith, or simply soldiers' determination not to shame themselves before sacred objects remains debated, but commanders value relics regardless of the mechanism behind their apparent efficacy. The Adeptus Sororitas assumes primary responsibility for coordinating Shrine World defense during major conflicts, their order's militant deploying forces that combine professional military capability with the religious fervor that permeates these sacred planets. The Battle Sisters bring discipline and combat experience that militia formations lack, their presence providing backbone for defensive lines that might otherwise collapse under determined assault. Canonesses commanding Sororitas forces establish command structures that integrate regular Imperial Guard units, militia formations, and civilian populations into coherent defensive systems. They assign sectors to different units based on their capabilities, positioning professional soldiers at critical strongpoints while using militia to hold less vital positions and employing civilian labor for logistics support and fortification construction. The Canonesses maintain communications with orbital defense forces, coordinate with Imperial Navy elements providing fire support, and liaise with ecclesiarchal authorities to ensure military necessities do not unnecessarily damage irreplaceable sacred sites. The psychological dimensions of Shrine World sieges affect both defenders and attackers in ways that distinguish these conflicts from conventional planetary assaults. Imperial forces defending sacred ground fight with intensity born from religious conviction, their determination to prevent enemy desecration of holy sites overriding normal survival instincts. Soldiers who might retreat from untenable positions on ordinary worlds stand and die defending Shrine World shrines, their final acts witnessed by billions through picked capture feeds that broadcast across entire sectors. These martyrdoms generate propaganda value that the Ecclesiarchy exploits extensively, their preachers citing defenders' sacrifices as examples of proper faith, while using their deaths to recruit new forces for ongoing conflicts. The constant stream of martyrdom stories emerging from besieged shrine worlds creates feedback loops where soldiers deploy to these planets already convinced that dying in their defense represents the highest achievement possible for faithful Imperial servants. Chaos forces attacking shrine worlds pursue objectives that extend beyond simple conquest to encompass the corruption and desecration of sites sacred to the Imperial cult. The traitor legions and their mortal followers recognize that defiling holy ground inflicts psychological damage across vast populations, weakening faith while demonstrating that the Emperor cannot protect his most sacred places. Chaos assault forces include specialists trained in ritual desecration, their knowledge of Imperial theology allowing them to identify the most spiritually significant targets and determine methods of defilement that maximize psychological impact. A Chaos warband might bypass tactically important positions to reach a cathedral housing a major saint's reliquary, their objective involving the destruction or corruption of sacred remains rather than the military advantage that capturing the cathedral's defensive positions would provide. These priorities sometimes create tactical opportunities for Imperial defenders, who exploit Chaos forces' focus on symbolic targets to launch counterattacks against enemy formations that have extended themselves pursuing religious rather than military objectives. The corruption of sacred sites follows patterns that reflect the specific Chaos powers motivating attacking forces. Cornate warbands transform shrines into charnel houses, piling corpses of defenders and civilians in mockery of religious displays, while conducting blood rituals that attract demonic manifestations. Nurglite forces spread diseases through shrine cities, their plagues transforming populations into plague bearers while corrupting water supplies and food stores with supernatural contagions. Slaaneshi cultists desecrate holy spaces through acts designed to profane the ascetic devotion that characterizes Orthodox Imperial worship, their rituals involving excesses that corrupt participants while mocking the self-denial that the Ecclesiarchy promotes. Tzeentchian forces pursue more subtle corruption, altering sacred texts, replacing authentic relics with tainted forgeries, and spreading theological confusion that undermines faith more insidiously than direct violence. The recapture of corrupted shrine worlds requires military operations followed by extensive purification rituals that can consume decades before the Ecclesiarchy declares planets ready to resume their sacred functions. The military phase involves Imperial forces retaking ground through conventional assault operations, their objectives including the elimination of remaining enemy forces and the destruction of Chaos installations that enemy occupiers constructed during their control. These battles generate enormous casualties as Imperial troops fight through shrine cities where every building might harbor ambushes, and where Chaos forces establish defensive positions in locations they know Imperial forces will hesitate to destroy with artillery or orbital bombardment. The Reclamation forces include significant Adepta Sororitas contingents, their battle sisters considered particularly suited for operations involving the cleansing of corrupted sacred spaces. The sisters fight with determination born from witnessing the desecration of sites they swore to protect, their fury at enemy sacrilege translating into combat effectiveness that sometimes exceeds even their normally formidable capabilities. The purification phase begins once military operations secure territory, its rituals designed to cleanse corruption from physical spaces while restoring the spiritual sanctity that justified shrine world designation. The Ecclesiarchy deploys teams of senior clergy who assess the extent of corruption and prescribe appropriate cleansing measures. Spaces that witnessed relatively minor desecration receive standard purification involving prayers, the application of blessed oils, and the burning of sacred incense. Areas where Chaos forces conducted major rituals or summoned demonic entities require more intensive treatment, including the physical demolition of affected structures, the excavation and replacement of contaminated soil, and the construction of new buildings on sites deemed cleansed through these measures. The most severely corrupted locations might receive designation as forbidden zones, their permanent abandonment justified through theological arguments that some taint cannot be fully removed regardless of purification efforts. The reconsecration ceremonies that mark the completion of purification efforts involve elaborate rituals attended by the highest-ranking ecclesiarchal authorities available, their participation lending weight to declarations that corrupted spaces have been restored to sacred status. Cardinals travel from across entire segmentums to participate in these ceremonies, their presence demonstrating ministorum commitment to reclaiming defiled holy ground. The rituals last for days, their liturgies incorporating prayers of cleansing, invocations of the emperor's protection, and formal declarations that corruption has been expelled. The ceremonies conclude with the installation or restoration of relics, their placement in newly consecrated spaces, symbolizing the return of divine presence to locations that chaos temporarily claimed. The Ecclesiarchy broadcasts recordings of reconsecration ceremonies across Imperial communications networks, their propaganda value lying in demonstrating that enemy victories remain temporary and that faith ultimately triumphs over corruption. The reconstruction of war-damaged shrine worlds draws funding from multiple sources, including ecclesiarchal treasuries, donations from wealthy pilgrims seeking to demonstrate devotion, and renewed tithe revenues as pilgrimage traffic resumes. The Adeptus Ministorum redirects substantial portions of its income toward rebuilding efforts, recognizing that failure to restore damaged shrine worlds would undermine faith across populations that witnessed their desecration. The reconstruction prioritizes the restoration of major shrines and processional routes, their repair taking precedence over residential areas or infrastructure serving permanent populations. This prioritization reflects ecclesiarchal calculations that pilgrims judge shrine worlds based on the condition of holy sites rather than the quality of life for local residents, making visible restoration of sacred spaces more important than improvements to housing or sanitation systems. The reconstruction efforts employ millions of workers, including local populations, pilgrims who volunteer their labor as acts of devotion, and indentured servitors assigned to construction duties as penance for various offenses. The creation of new martyrdom sites from siege battles adds layers of sacred significance to shrine worlds that already possessed religious importance before conflicts, their transformation reflecting how Imperial theology incorporates suffering and sacrifice into narratives of faith. The locations where defenders made final stands become pilgrimage destinations, their designation as martyrdom sites justified through the courage displayed by soldiers who died preventing enemy advances. The Ecclesiarchy constructs shrines at these locations, their architecture designed to commemorate specific acts of sacrifice while providing spaces where pilgrims can pray and reflect on the defenders' examples. The shrines typically incorporate physical remnants from the battles, including damaged weapons, fragments of destroyed fortifications, and occasionally preserved remains of particularly notable defenders whose deaths the Ministorum deems worthy of special veneration. These new pilgrimage sites generate additional revenue streams for the Ecclesiarchy while reinforcing theological messages about the spiritual value of dying in the emperor's service. The political consequences of successful shrine world defense extend beyond immediate military outcomes to affect the balance of power within the Ecclesiarchy and relationships between the Ministorum and other imperial institutions. Cardinals whose worlds survived sieges emerge with enhanced prestige, their successful coordination of defensive efforts demonstrating competence that translates into influence within the Synod Ministra. They leverage this influence to secure appointments to more important positions, gain control over additional resources, and advance theological or political agendas that benefit their factions within the Ministorum. The Adeptus Sororitas gains recognition for its role in defending sacred sites, the Order's militant receiving increased funding and expanded recruitment authorization as rewards for their service. The Imperial Guard units that participated in successful defenses earn battle honors that enhance their reputations, though the catastrophic casualties typically suffered during Shrine World sieges mean that few original members survive to enjoy the recognition. The failures to hold Shrine Worlds against determined attacks generate recriminations that reverberate through imperial command structures, their political fallout sometimes exceeding the strategic consequences of territorial losses. The Ecclesiarchy demands investigations into why defensive efforts failed, their inquiries seeking to assign blame to military commanders, identify institutional failures that allowed enemy success, and determine whether any defenders betrayed their duties through cowardice or incompetence. The investigations operate through ecclesiastical courts that combine religious and military authority, their proceedings examining everything from initial defensive preparations through final moments before enemy forces overran positions. Commanders found responsible for losses face severe consequences, including execution, though the Ministorum sometimes shows leniency toward officers whose forces fought to the last rather than surrendering or retreating. The investigations serve purposes beyond simple accountability. Their findings used to develop improved defensive doctrines and identify systemic weaknesses that future garrison forces can address. The long-term effects of major sieges on Shrine World populations manifest in ways that distinguish these conflicts from wars fought on ordinary Imperial planets. The survivors carry psychological scars from witnessing the desecration of sites they considered inviolable, their faith tested by experiences that revealed the Emperor's protection operates according to principles they struggle to understand. Some emerge with strengthened devotion, their survival interpreted as evidence of divine favor, and their determination to serve the Emperor intensified by witnessing the consequences of heresy. Others develop doubts that they dare not express openly, but that undermine their participation in religious observances and reduce their willingness to accept ecclesiarchal authority without question. The Ministorum monitors populations for signs of wavering faith, its confessors conducting extensive counseling sessions with siege survivors and identifying individuals who require additional spiritual guidance or, in extreme cases, investigation for potential heresy. The strategic lessons derived from Shrine World sieges inform Imperial defensive planning across multiple institutions, though the unique characteristics of these conflicts limit the applicability of specific tactical innovations to conventional warfare. The Adeptus Munitorum studies after action reports from major sieges, analyzing what worked and what failed while attempting to extract principles that might apply to defending other high-value targets. The integration of civilian populations into defensive systems, the effective use of religious fervor to sustain morale under extreme conditions, and the coordination between professional military forces and militia formations all provide case studies that military planners incorporate into training programs and operational doctrines. However, the willingness to accept casualties that would be considered unacceptable in other contexts, the prioritization of symbolic objectives over tactical advantages, and the reliance on faith-based factors that resist quantification mean that Shrine World defensive operations remain distinct from standard Imperial military practice. The Imperium's continued commitment to defending Shrine Worlds regardless of cost reflects fundamental aspects of Imperial ideology that prioritize faith over material considerations. The Adeptus Terra accepts that these defensive operations consume resources that purely rational analysis might allocate elsewhere, but the political and spiritual necessities of protecting sacred sites override economic calculations. The loss of a Shrine World to enemy forces inflicts damage that extends far beyond the immediate military consequences, potentially weakening faith across entire sectors and emboldening enemies who recognize that successful attacks on holy ground generate disproportionate psychological effects. The Imperium cannot afford to abandon these planets without abandoning the religious foundations that justify its existence and bind together populations across 1,000,000 worlds. The Shrine Worlds stand as physical manifestations of Imperial faith, their defense representing not simply military necessity, but existential requirement. As long as the Imperium endures, its armies will march to protect these sacred spaces, its soldiers will die defending holy ground, and the Ecclesiarchy will rebuild what enemies destroy, maintaining through blood and prayer the network of faith that sustains humanity's galactic dominion.